If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this.
The most unexplainable and paranormal things people have ever seen. Creepy encounters, demonic events, and supernatural experiences that still haunt them.
I have encountered several, but one of the most peculiar incidents was also observed by my highly skeptical husband. We were driving through our town at approximately 2 p.m. in the middle of the day. It was a Saturday, and we were heading home while out running errands. We turned off a busy commercial road onto a wooded residential street that has a large apartment complex on one side and a wooded park on the other. As we drove down the street, we got to the bottom of a hill, and something ran in front of our car. It was shaped like a dog, but it was see-through or reflective, yet shimmery, almost exactly like when the predator goes invisible. Its material was as if a metal mixing bowl were liquefied into the shape of a dog. It ran right in front of our car, and we slammed on the brakes and were like, "What the F, do you see that? What is that?" It kept running across the road and then disappeared before getting to the other side of the road. This was over 10 years ago, and last year, I had a Lyft driver who asked me if I believed in aliens. I said I was open to just about any possibilities because I had seen things I couldn't explain before. He proceeded to tell me about an animal that got into his fenced yard that was exactly the same as the see-through thing my husband and I had seen. He described it exactly the same way, and he claimed that it was trapped in his backyard, and he was so freaked out that he called the cops. He said that when the police arrived, 2 officers also saw the creature. As they approached it in his backyard, it just disappeared. He said the cops then refused to engage with the situation any further and told him to GTFO, and when he asked them to file a report or what they were going to do, they said they couldn't help him because they would get ridiculed and lose all credibility if they reported it. I couldn't believe it, and I said, "Dude, I have seen the exact same thing." I told him my story, and we were both flabbergasted that we had had this same experience in our town. He lived on the east side, and I had my experience on the south side. It's so bizarre, I have no idea what to make of it. When I was around 4 years old, I remember looking out of my bedroom window and seeing cars driving through our side yard. Instead of looking like our yard, it looked like an actual road, and the cars were old-fashioned looking, like from the 1940s, this was in the 1970s. Our house was in a plan of homes with pretty large lots, and the through street ran in a completely different area. Naturally, I was frightened by what I saw and ran to tell my mother and older sister. They dismissed it and said I was either dreaming or making things up. I guess I can't really blame them for that. My sister occasionally would tease me about it over the years, and for some reason every time I was in that part of the yard I would get a creepy feeling that I shouldn't be there. I must have been about 12 or 13, and my grandmother was visiting. She told my sister and me that when she was a young girl, our neighborhood was part of a farm, and the main road used to run right through our side yard. The road was moved when the farm was broken up into housing lots. My sister and I looked at each other. All I could say was, "Yes, I know." Years later I found aerials and maps online that proved the road was there until the 1940s. My husband was at work a few days ago, and I was playing video games with some online friends. I suddenly heard my husband's voice calling me. It said, "Babe, can you come in here for a second?" I had my headset on, and we were still in the lobby of the game, so I told my friends to wait because I think my husband came home early. Our bedroom, where I was, can look directly into the living room, open floor plan, so I didn't go in there, I just looked, and it was empty. I thought I was tripping, so I went back to the game. Right as I was about to put my headset back on, I heard it again. It said, "Babe, come here." I looked again, and nothing. I thought my husband was just trying to scare me, so I called his phone. Despite my belief that I would hear it ring from the living room, I was mistaken. He answered, and he's a truck driver, so I could hear the engine of his truck on the phone. I asked where he was. He told me that he was on his way back from Illinois. Just to be certain, I asked him to honk the horn. He did. I instantly freaked out, shut my system off, didn't even tell my friends, and ran out of the house through the back door. Got in my car and drove to a park and waited there until my husband got home. I told my husband about this. He believed me. He said it was a mimic and that I should never answer or respond to it. My husband, a strong believer in the paranormal, explained that once a mimic realizes you can hear it, it will persistently imitate loved ones to drive you insane, cause illness, and potentially lead to death. Does anyone know more about this? This is the first and only time this has happened. I grew up deer hunting in rural Virginia. One of the first times I went out alone, I was a young teenager. I set up a stand deeper in the woods before dawn on the property we hunted. Usually, as the sun rises, you hear birds flitting around in the underbrush, and eventually you hear the dogs running, but that morning I didn't hear anything. Quiet as all hell. So I just kept my eyes on the trees and waited. Then I noticed it. About 50 yards into the woods, there was this thing just dancing against a tree. As weird as it sounds, it looked like an 80-year-old man gyrating and dancing on the tree. It would have been funny, but something was deeply wrong with the way it was moving. Like its joints didn't make sense. I stared at it for what felt like minutes, and it just kept squirming against the tree. After the initial fear passed, I stood up from the stand and walked a little closer into the woods to see if it was some kind of optical illusion or something. That's when I think it saw me. Because it stopped gyrating and froze. I swear it stared at me. Then it slowly moved behind the tree. I backed out of the woods until I was on the trail, then radioed him that I was leaving and I needed someone to come get me as soon as I got the chance. I never told anyone at the hunt club what happened. Just chalked it up to minimal sleep and nerves, but I will never forget how scared I was when it saw me. I live in a decently sized city in western Indiana surrounded by farmland. One evening as the sun had begun to set, my brother and I were driving back home on the southern side of town, where it turns from your average outlet shopping areas into cornfields. It had started to get dark enough that the car's headlights turned on, but you could still see the scenery fairly well. We approached the crossroad that we lived on and started to turn right. As we were turning, the headlights illuminated this tall humanoid creature that resembled something like a deer standing on its hind legs, sprinting away into the cornfield. The stalks were only about shin height at the time, so I was able to see it for maybe 2 to 3 seconds. Judging by the distance it traveled across the field in that time, it had to have been moving faster than any regular person could run. Immediately I was disturbed with what I had seen, but thinking it was just some sort of trick of the light, I didn't say anything. My brother, however, confirmed my fears by asking if I had just witnessed what he had. Every time I see the field, I'm reminded of whatever thing it was. The worst part is knowing whatever it was less than a few hundred feet from my house. I have a brother who is 8 years older than me. My mom used to talk about a creepy, grinning version of my brother that she and a babysitter saw when he was little. It seemed to age with him, and my mom saw him multiple times. The babysitter saw him once and freaked the duck out. I saw him when I was in high school. My brother worked multiple jobs and was gone a lot. To help him out and make some extra cash, I would clean his room and do his laundry for him each week. I would usually stay up late Saturday nights to watch Mad TV and SNL while folding laundry. Though my brother was at work and everyone else was asleep, I began to sense someone watching me. When I turned to look, there was my brother peeking around the wall of the hallway at me with a super creepy grin on his face. All I could see were his hands holding the wall and his head sticking out around the corner, but that grin was freaky. I instantly thought my brother was messing with me, so I said something along the lines of, "Uck. Duck off," and looked back to the TV. Then I remembered that he wasn't even home, and the hairs on my arms stood up. I looked back, and he was gone. But the next morning, I told my mom what I had seen, and she just nodded in understanding. It was almost as freaky as the times I would catch something out of the corner of my eye or hear something late at night and try to ignore it only for my dog to start growling and facing the same direction. That house had some weird shit sometimes. When I was about 6, every night I would hear this ticking noise in my closet. It sounded like someone typing loudly on a keyboard. But every time I called my mom, the noise would stop just before she walked into the room. She would open the closet, and there was nothing out of the ordinary in there, and then she would get annoyed with me because she thought I was trying to stall going to bed. This went on for weeks. I was terrified of going to bed every night. One night, the ticking doesn't stop. My mom heard it, so she opened the closet. It sounded like it was coming out of a toy chest that was in the closet, so my mom opened it, and inside was a My Little Pony toy glowing in the dark. It was so bright it looked radioactive. The freaky thing was, this was not a glow-in-the-dark toy. My mom completely freaked out. She was screaming for my dad. He came, dropped it in a metal trash can, and set it alight. From that day, ticking stopped, but I was never allowed to get any My Little Pony toys again. I have absolutely no idea what it was. Maybe there was some logical explanation for it, maybe not, but I have had enough bizarre experiences to firmly believe that there is a spiritual world out there that we can't see. I was alone at home, watching TV in the living room. The curtains, about a meter away from me, started shaking vigorously. There were no open windows, drafts, or flies/insects that could have made the curtains move like that. It was just like an invisible person was waving with the curtains. I froze and pretended I didn't notice. This made it worse. I could still see/hear it from the corner of my eyes. Something really wanted to get my attention, but it also felt scary. So, I left the room and started listening to happy music, which luckily worked. Never happened again. A close family member had passed a year or so previously, but this didn't feel like them. I had another experience with what I think was them, which felt not scary at all. The other thing that happened in the same room a few months later was some distinct knocking on the window. I was living in one of the top floor apartments, so nobody could have knocked from the outside. I ignored it again, and that was that. I still think about it and wonder sometimes. Back in 1996, when I was 26 years old, I woke up to a feeling that I was being looked at or watched. I remember that I didn't need to move, only had to open my eyes, and there, just outside the window looking in right at me, was a disembodied head. It was ghoulish and wrinkled and gray in color. I could see that it was floating in the air because it had no body. I remember thinking to wait and be still to see what it would do, like disappear or move around. But it just stayed there for a good few seconds. I also remember wondering if it was my imagination, but the time it took to be there was long enough for me to become more awake. I also realized that I had not closed the curtains like I normally would because my boyfriend and I came back from a late night out. The head then slowly vanished by dissipating into nothingness. This occurred during the very early morning light. I thought it was a demon or interdimensional being. This was almost 30 years ago, and I still wonder what it was. Why did it come to look at me? I was driving home from work and ended up getting struck by another car. I have no memory of the crash itself, I just recall waking up on the side of the road. As I was lying there, I noticed movement in a stand of trees a ways off from the road. I couldn't make out anything initially other than just movement until it stepped into the beams of my vehicle's headlights. Picture a werewolf but with black fur, no visible ears, and a wolf's skull for a head, and that's about what I saw. The thing walked over to the other car and seemed to snoop around like it was looking for something but didn't find it, so it made its way over to my vehicle. And when it saw me, I could see its eyes light up. But all it ended up doing was standing over me and looking down at me as I stared up at it, too scared to so much as blink. But after what felt like hours, the thing finally blinked, and next thing I know, I'm being loaded into the back of an ambulance. Was about 17 years old. My dad's company he worked for had a beach house in Brookings, Oregon, that senior employees could sign up for and use for free for a few days or a week. So we head there, and it's great, exactly as advertised. I decided to go out at night with a friend I had brought along to explore and drive around the town. We turned down this one road and made it a couple 100 feet down. For context, there were high bushes on each side of the road and trees creating a canopy over the road. After we made it a little way down, the headlights of the car just kind of stopped lighting stuff. It was like a wall of black in front of us. No streetlights, no house lights, nothing. We pulled forward a little more, and the headlights continued to kind of end at this wall of black and just stop illuminating anything beyond or around it. Buddy and I each got a chill down our spines and decided it wasn't worth exploring anymore. We backed up and turned around and left. It was absolutely surreal. Here I am over 30 years later, and if you put a gun to my head, I'd say that someone built a wall and painted it with Vantablack. But back then? I don't know, it was just eerie as hell. We went back in the daytime the next day. It was a totally normal road. There was absolutely no explanation for why the road and lights seemed to disappear beyond the point we discovered them the previous night. I did not investigate it any more the rest of the trip, and I went home after a few days with a creepy story and plenty of skeptical looks from friends and family. My buddy and I told them about it. Back in 1995 when I was a teen, I went to Michigan to visit my cousins. That night I fell asleep in my cousin's room on a large beanbag chair. This is where I don't remember what happened during the incident but was told in detail by my 7 family members who rushed in the room in the early hours of the morning. At some point around 3:30 to 4 a.m. I woke up screaming. I was told my back was arched, arms and legs spread wide at my sides, head bent back, and my eyes rolling back. My mom and aunt said it was just one long, high-pitched scream. Everyone was in shock, and my mom said no one moved to touch me. Instead, my aunt came forward and snapped her fingers real loud right over my head and said my name loud and firmly. The next thing I actually remember is opening my eyes and seeing all my family looking absolutely terrified at me. I was so confused because it felt like I had just fallen asleep a minute ago. For years my family and I went down the list of what could have caused it. I have no medical disorders or diseases. I was a kid who didn't drink, smoke, or do drugs. It never happened again. I'm 43 now, and the incident is still talked about to this day at family gatherings. And everyone still gets this eerie look when referring to it. When I was around 14, 11-ish years ago, I was at a friend's house on night babysitting her little sisters, who were around 8/9 years old. We would typically put them to bed at approximately 9 o'clock and find ourselves downstairs about an hour later when we heard loud banging originating from upstairs, accompanied by footsteps, doors opening and closing, and similar noises, as if someone were moving around rapidly. Assuming it was my friend's sisters, we've gone upstairs, and both sisters were fast asleep in bed, rooms on opposite sides of the staircase, so we'd have seen them running back to their rooms to pretend to be asleep if it was them. The friend's family consulted a medium after experiencing several strange incidents, and the medium confirmed that many years before they lived there, a family with young children was reportedly being evicted by the council. Not wanting to leave, the parents ended them and then took their lives. We've tried looking into the history of the house over the years but haven't managed to find anything relating to what the medium said. It still freaks me out to this day. They obviously ended up moving house. When my twin sons were around 2 and just learning basic words, my husband and I took them to visit my in-laws at my father-in-law's hunting cabin he built in the woods. We ate dinner and began the drive home. His cabin is about a mile into the woods, and at the end of the path by the road, there is a very old cemetery. The graves are mostly from the 1800s. It was dark out, so you couldn't really see that we were passing the cemetery as we pulled out, and my kids were 2 and had no idea what a cemetery even was. So we get to the end of the path, driving slowly since it is bumpy, and from the back seat my son says, "Mommy, Daddy, I hear people crying." It sort of scared me, but I thought maybe we heard him wrong, so I asked what he meant. Again he says, "I hear all the people crying." My husband and I freak out a little but pull out of the drive onto the main road. A little ways down the road I ask my son if he hears anything. No, he says it stopped. So my husband decides to take a road past another cemetery on our way home. Just to test it. As soon as we get beside the next cemetery, my son says from the back seat, "I hear the people crying again." At this point we just decided to never ride near a cemetery again with him. 1 or 2 more things happened but stopped within the year. He's 16 now and has no memory of any of it. I had something going on for months that I still can't explain. I lived with my mom at the time and was probably 15/16 when this happened. I'd always been a lover of horror movies and interested in anything spiritual but never felt like I truly believed anything could happen. At the time I had a single bed pushed up against one corner of my bedroom, and one night I started seeing this girl appear as I was falling asleep. It would start whenever I went to close my eyes. I'd close my eyes and see this girl kneeling in front of me at eye level. She had her eyes closed, but I still felt like I was being watched. It happened for maybe a week before I started feeling really uneasy, and as I fell further asleep, this girl became less clear and began moving into the opposite corner of the room. I did not physically get up and move, but I felt her presence become more sinister and dark, and that corner of the room was pitch black even though it was opposite the window. I tried to tell my mom, but she didn't want to know anything paranormal. I kept it to myself and just got on with less sleep than usual. Then I had 2 really unsettling things happen. One friend came over after school with me to grab something from my room. We were standing at my bedroom door, her in my room and me standing on the upstairs landing, and she starts crying. Like really scared crying. She says, "There's something behind me," and of course I'm like, "Excuse me?" I had not mentioned a single thing to her at all, and she told me she felt like there was something standing right behind her breathing down her neck. I stayed in her house that night and had friends over the following night to try to get myself over it. When I had my friends over, 2 of us shared a bed, and in the morning I asked her how she had slept. She's very spiritual, for your information. She said fine, but I saw a girl in here, and it kept me awake for a while. She was totally unfazed, and I asked her to explain, and when I say she described exactly what I had been experiencing down to the smallest detail. I basically shat my pants there and then. She then tells me that if I'm uncomfortable, I have to tell whatever spirit that I'm not afraid and to leave me alone. Absolutely terrifying concept. I FaceTimed whatever friend I could that night and shouted to get out of my space and leave me in peace. Never experienced any discomfort in that room ever again. There's a secret room under the closet in my apartment that's only accessible from the outside via a hidden door, which looked like it used to have a padlock on it. When I first moved in, there was a bunch of disinterested wood dust in there, so I decided to clean it up to try and repurpose it for something. The room had a really weird feel to it, like there were millions of twisted dark emotions in the air. Among the dust, I found several animal bones that appeared to be dog or cat sized, 2 old whiskey bottles, and some burnt herbs covering a thick concrete slab, which was flanked by 2 4-foot walls that seemed to have once held a casket. There was a bunch of rocks piled up on one side, so I decided to look through those out of curiosity. As I was searching through, I found what looked like person-sized bones. At this point I decided to abandon any ideas for the room, put the rocks back, and get out of there as quickly as I could. The following night, I had a dream about a little girl. She was in the room playing with dolls and beating them against the concrete. A large man thrust open the door, grabbed her, and started screaming. I woke up in a fright and could feel a cold shadow beside my bed, the air noticeably cooler than before. It was summertime, so it was fairly warm out still. The shadow vanished after a couple of minutes, and the air returned to normal. Ever since that incident, I have avoided that room, as I do not know what else might be hiding there. I was about 5 years old and visiting my grandparents. I used to set my console up to play on the TV in their bedroom. On this particular day I was alone in the house. I used to do this thing where I'd look away from the TV and try to see how far I could get in Tiny Toons without looking at the screen. When I was facing the other direction, I saw a black silhouette of a man wearing a long coat and a top hat. It stuck its hand out and motioned for me to come over. I sat there and stared at it for a couple of seconds. I shut my eyes, and when I opened them, it was gone. I got up and slowly left the room. To this day I still get a little creeped out when I visit my grandparents. I have a fair share of stories like this. It started from me seeing people no one else would, to me seeing demonic creatures. My dad's family has a history of certain family members being gifted with the sixth sense. My parents believed I was one of them. I found out about my sister who died as an infant not from any of my living family members but from her. She started playing with me as a kid, and she followed me throughout my teenage years. The last time I saw her, she asked me to ask my mom what her name was. So I did, and needless to say, my parents were shocked. She was never assigned a name. Once my parents ultimately bestowed one upon her, she ceased to appear thereafter. The most memorable was moving to one of my mom's homes at 13. It felt light in the house when the sun was up, but it felt so heavy whenever it was nighttime. My mom had this mirror she bought all the way from Italy. Whenever we moved, that mirror came with us. When we moved to that house, she initially had it in the living room, but then she put it in my brother's room. My brother, 27 years old at that time, started to get sleep paralysis every night. He never wanted to sleep in that room. He said he felt heavy in there. Whenever he sleeps on the couch or in my other brother's room, he is fine, but not when he is in that room. One day, he took that mirror out of his room to make space for his dresser. My mom decided to put it in my room. He stopped having sleep paralysis. From that day on, I started feeling uneasy. Like I said in the beginning, I always see them but not this one. I never saw it, but I felt it. Each night, I would drape a towel and a scarf over the mirror and secure them with a rope prior to sleeping. Every morning at 3 a.m., I would wake up to the feeling of someone pulling me from my legs down to the end of the bed. Every single day. Exactly at 3 a.m. First it felt like a fever dream, but it progressed from me waking up with scratch marks on both of my legs to me actually waking up with scratches at the end of the bed. This phenomenon happened for at least 3 years. I kept telling my mom, and she never believed me. They believe I see ghosts, but she never believed this one. One morning at exactly 3 a.m., I woke up to my body shaking uncontrollably. It wasn't cold. I looked around, and everything felt wrong. The moon that night was unusually bright, and I could see everything in my room. My fan was off. I never turned it off. My night light was off. I am afraid of the dark and never turned it off even when the sun was up. But the worst part is, the towel and the scarf on the mirror were on the floor, and the ropes were scattered all over the floor. The mirror, which typically faces the door, was turned to face me. That mirror is at least 150 pounds. Someone or something moved it. I looked at my door and saw the knob was still locked. When I looked back at the mirror, I finally saw it. I saw this white figure standing in front of it. No face, no visible limbs, just a white figure almost opaque, but I knew it was staring at me. I couldn't scream, and it was so hard to move. I gathered all my strength and courage to open the door and walk backwards, keeping my eyes on whatever that figure was. When I got in front of my parents' room, that's when I started screaming and crying. I never slept in that room after that night. My dad slept there once. He had a dream where I was sitting on his chest choking him, just to wake up sweating and with scratches all over him. Whatever that was, I know it's demonic. I'm so glad that I lost that gift of a sixth sense when I moved to the US. I hope to never wake it up ever again. So I have always been very curious about the supernatural. During COVID, I worked as a traveling mechanic for a commuter rail service. I had many responsibilities, but the one, unfortunately, I had to deal with the most was suicides. During the heart of the pandemic, I was going 2 to 3 times a week. I pretty much had to make sure there was no damage and the train was safe to operate. I had one in late September where the victim was caught up in the power cables between the cars, and I had to assist in getting her untangled so the coroner could take the body away. I hadn't seen a body up close since my time in the military, and it was a bit unnerving. Fast forward around a week, and I was traveling back from a call when the weather changed dramatically almost instantaneously. I am talking about a good 20-degree drop and high winds. I was around a mile from my work trailer, and my truck just died. Now keep in mind I was working long, stress-filled hours during this time. I got out to pop the hood, and the truck cab temp dropped. I looked over, and the woman whose body I had helped untangle was sitting in the passenger seat, but I could see right through her. I fell out of the truck and ran across the street. A few minutes later it began to pour rain and hail. I went back to the truck, and she was gone. I will never forget that night, and I still have nightmares about it. I live in a rural area of my state. Think like driving 30 minutes to get to a store type of rural. This event actually happened recently. I was outside with my dogs at approximately 3 a.m., a story in itself. Our house backs up to the woods, but there is a clearing a few yards in. So the dogs and I are near the edge of the woods when I start to hear war drums. Me being like, nope. Let's go, Ivar, and turned to walk away, but he was firmly planted, looking in the direction of the noise, and would not move. After about a minute, the sound of the drums stopped, and there was a roaring noise. It was like the sound of thousands of people rushing into battle. It wasn't windy at all that night, but we were hit with a heavy gust of wind, and all the noise stopped. It thoroughly freaked out both my dog and me. I haven't heard it since then. Maybe 10 years ago or so, when I was still in middle school, my parents decided to have our apartment repainted. Every piece of furniture had to be moved and covered in white sheets. My parents' bedroom was the only room left free so we'd have somewhere to sleep while the painting was being done. One winter day, I came home from school around 4. It was already fairly dark, and my parents wouldn't be home for another hour. I headed straight to their room and switched on the TV to watch some cartoons. I was the only one home, so I left the bedroom door open so I could hear when my parents finally arrived. After 20 or so minutes, I hear a faint squeaking noise. It's too loud to be a mouse, but I didn't have any pets at the time, so that couldn't be it either. It seemed to be coming from the bathroom, which I can't see very well from the bedroom door. Deciding to be brave, I get up and slowly start walking into the hallway. I can feel all the blood draining from my face as I reach the doorway. I'm staring directly at the bathroom door, which is swinging wildly back and forth. It always looks like it's about to close, but then it swings all the way open again. In a panic, kind of hilarious now that I think back on it, I shove the door open, flip the light switch on, and sit in front of the door so it can't possibly swing anymore. Just as this happens, I can hear the locks of the front door tumbling. My mom walks in, sees me, and is so confused. Everyone I explain this story to tries to tell me it was just the wind or a draft from one of the vents, but there was no way that could be possible. The door was swinging way too wildly as if someone was holding it, and there were no windows open at the time / there are no windows in my bathroom. I still have no reasonable explanation, but I still live in the same apartment, and nothing like that has happened since. My childhood home, where I'm currently writing this story. We moved in during the summer of '98. There are many strange things about the property, like hidden sliding doors in the garage with the remains of maybe a photo studio and holes cut in the floor patched with plywood. All of these strange features were unsettling, and I wondered if they were used for making fake IDs. Then the dream started. My brother was prone to night terrors, often saying he would see faces floating above him at night. He would wake up screaming that something else was at the window. My older brother would make comments too, asking who came in his room at night. None of us did. He would be shook up about things, but when asked, he'd say, "I don't know anything." It was also around this time that I found myself waking up with growing pains, and so I'd venture into our kitchen for water. They thought it was dehydration. I remember my mom sleeping on the couch and the windows being open on a breezy night. I drank my water and started to head back to bed when I noticed she wasn't there on the couch anymore. It's a small house, and I knew she couldn't have walked by me. I went into my parents' bedroom, and she was sleeping in bed beside my father. I went back to the kitchen, and the windows were shut. No one had closed them. I asked in the morning, and my mom gave me this look I'll never forget. She hadn't gotten up at all. My dad shared a similar story weeks later. We would hear the front door open and close, although no one was ever there. Sometimes it would happen with 3 of us standing there by the door, but it never opened on its own. More things happened. Strange figures would be seen out of the corner of our eyes. They looked like the liquid Capri Sun people of the 2000s, and even though we'd follow them, they would disappear around the corners. We got a dog shortly after our first year, and it too noticed things. It would stand in the doorway, never entering the room, and growl at the shower, even when the curtain was pulled back. I always felt like I was being watched, as though something sinister was behind the curtain. An image of a female form, long and lanky with charred skin, long dark hair, and foot-long nails, would come to mind. It was well agreed by my parents and siblings that something was off. Years later we would talk about it, and my sister and mom said they felt the same image came to mind, a soaked, charred woman-like thing behind the curtain. Even now I feel it when I'm there alone at night. My parents brought holy water into the home, and for a long while things calmed down. For about 3 years it stayed quiet, and then out of nowhere it started up again. We went to get the holy water, and the closed container was full of ants. It was impossible for them to get inside, and even so, why the water? As the years have gone by, most of the things have quieted down, but there's definitely something off here. My family has a long history of having encountered haunted places, and I could share those stories too. I don't believe in all things metaphysical, but after this, I believe in ghosts. I used to work in a toy store. We were doing a remodel, so they moved me to an overnight shift to supervise a crew of temps. We began with 40, but a month later, it was just me and 2 other girls. We lost a lot of the workers due to some claims of paranormal activity. One night, only I and one of the other 2 girls were present because the third girl had called out sick. We're in the break room having our lunch break, and we're sitting at the table. A penny falls on the table. Then another and another. I looked up, expecting to see coins wedged in the ceiling panels, thinking one of the day shift people was playing a prank on whoever was in there when the coins started coming loose and falling. Nope. I saw a penny suddenly appear out of nowhere a few inches below the ceiling before it fell. Suddenly they were literally raining down all over the room. We run out, and we're listening at the door, and it sounds crazy in there. When it stopped, we cautiously went back in, and there were pennies everywhere. All over the room. The girl I was working with quit on the spot. I had to go let her out, and then I went back and picked up the pennies. I had a couple of dollars worth of pennies picked up. I just kept working until morning because I didn't have keys to lock it up, and of course none of the managers thought to give me their phone numbers. The rest of the night was quiet and uneventful. But I tell you, even without raining pennies, being in a huge toy store at night by yourself is a kind of creepy feeling. This is something really weird that I don't think I've ever told before. So basically, I live in a very scenic neighborhood, near the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. We have 2 decent-sized ponds side by side in the neighborhood, with one of them being right across the street from my house. When I was younger, approximately 5 years old, I would observe yellow and blue circles emerging from the lake, resembling a face, possibly accompanied by other features that I cannot recall. It frightened me greatly. I initially believed it to be a hallucination for some time, but perhaps when I was approximately 6 years old, we participated in a neighborhood Easter egg hunt, which took place near the playground, pool, ponds, and other amenities. I saw the face-like thing in the lake again, but then one of my friend's older brothers pointed it out too. I freaked out at that point, being scared to go down to the pond for maybe a year. I even asked my friend and their parent to go back without even telling them what was happening. Eventually, when I was maybe 7 to 8, I stopped seeing the thing. It freaks me out when I see stuff that says children can see things other people can't. Every thought of it sends shivers down my spine. About a month ago, I saw a strange bubble floating on the surface of the lake where I used to observe unusual appearances. It is the weirdest thing that I have ever seen. By the way, I'm 13, so this wasn't that long ago. I think we pissed off some spirits. There was a very old wooden house in a suburban area that looked shady as duck. Like, if you were to drive by a super rural area and you saw a shitty house, you'd think, yeah, that belongs there. But not this house. This house was settled in an area surrounded by houses that were a hell of a lot nicer and more modern. Anyways, we bought the shitty house, tore it down, and built it into a house where I and my family currently live. We've lived in this house for a decade, and we've experienced some strange incidents. My first experience was when I was trying to fall asleep in my bed. There was some light shining through the windows, but my room was still pretty dark. My eyes were closed for a few minutes because that's what people do when they're trying to fall asleep. All of a sudden I felt something on my face. Like there was someone breathing on me. I opened my eyes, looking at the ceiling, but there was nothing. When I moved my head forward, looking straight ahead, I saw dark shadows that were shaped like 2 girls standing at the foot of my bed as if they were staring at me. The next incident occurred when I was alone in the kitchen, lying down on the couch and watching TV. My sister's room was literally right above where I was watching TV. All of a sudden there were some heavy footsteps. And finally, this last incident really scares me. This happened during a cold season when Christmas had already passed. At 12 a.m., my parents were asleep, my sisters had moved out, and I was still in my room messing around. I heard something coming out of my parents' room. I opened my door to see what's up, and that's when I heard my mom crying. I went over to my parents' room. My mom was crying pretty bad, and the situation/vibe was so strange. It scared me. I asked her what's wrong, and she told me she heard a group of people singing outside of the window. When you look outside of the window from my parents' room, all you see are houses, the sidewalk, and a small street. She told me to look outside to see if there was anything, but there wasn't anything. Not a single person in sight, and I couldn't hear a sound. It was completely silent. But who knows? Perhaps she was experiencing a nightmare, and I'm simply insane. I am Native American, and I believe I have encountered my doppelganger 3 times, or perhaps something else that resembles it. I was about 13 the first time. My family and I were at one of the tribe's sacred grounds for a get-together, and as one of the oldest children, I got put in charge of watching all the younger kids who were playing out on the soccer field. I had to use the bathroom really badly, so I told them all to just play until I got back from it. Halfway to the bathroom I got a horrible feeling in my gut and knew something was just not right, so I turned back immediately only to see all the children gone. I saw the hair of one of the children headed into the woods, where we were not supposed to go because the land we were on was protected but not the surrounding woods. I never ran so fast in my life. I caught up to the kids, including my 3 younger siblings, and yelled, "What are you doing?" They all turned back very fast, and I shouted, "Why are you in the woods? We're not supposed to be here." They just looked very confused, so I asked why they were looking at me like that, and one of my younger siblings started crying and said they were just following me. Apparently I had asked them to go into the woods with me, which I would never do because I fear the woods. I stayed as calm as I could and told them, "No, we need to get back now." The second time I was about 14. Where I went to school bordered some woods. I was late to lunch because I had to finish some work, and when I returned to the hill behind the playground where my friends and I usually hung out, no one was there. I had the same uneasy feeling, so I ventured back into the woods. I found all my friends in the woods, so I caught up to them, used some colorful language, and asked what they were doing, warning that we were going to get into trouble. Cue the confused looks, and then they said the same thing the kids did. "We followed you. You told us to follow you." Again I flipped my lid. I would never have led you guys into the woods. They argued a bit with me, insisting it was me. I got them to come back with me. The final time happened when I was about 16. My best friend and I, she had been involved in the second incident, were hanging out in the field behind her house, which bordered, yep, you guessed it, woods. Once more, I experienced the urge to use the restroom. Once again, I experienced a horrible gut feeling and had to run back. My best friend was sitting on a stump looking pretty freaked out. I knew before she even said anything what she had seen. "What happened?" I asked even though I knew. She said I tried to get her to follow me into the woods, but she knew I would never do that, especially not after what happened a few years prior, and she knew my fear of the woods. She said it looked just like me but with red eyes. I still don't know what it was, but it was meant to harm those it was trying to lead away. I have experienced many other incidents, but explaining them would take too much time, so I will only discuss these 3. Back in the mid-90s, when I was 11, my parents had just sold our house, and we rented for a year while looking for another place to buy. The house we rented was a 1920s-era bungalow. It was one of those houses that looks small from the outside, but inside there are a surprising number of fairly large and interconnected rooms. On the back of the house, there were 2 back doors, one door that opened out to a small deck and stairs, and another door that was located partway down the basement stairs. That lower door was level with the driveway that ran around behind the house, so we tended to go in and out through that lower door. We never, ever, used that other back door. It had several serious locks, a standard locking doorknob, a deadbolt, and an additional large bolt. I'm still not exactly sure why it had so many locks on it, considering the quiet suburban neighborhood where we lived. Naturally, since we never used that door, we always kept all of the locks securely in place. I'm sure you can see where this is going. One day, my mom and I were hanging out in the house while my dad was out running an errand or some such thing. I was drawing pictures in the room we used as a playroom, and my mom was cleaning, doing laundry, and that sort of thing. Suddenly, I hear my mom yell my name. She happened to walk past that upper door, and it was wide open. She asked me why I opened it, and of course, I was as shocked as she was. We closed it and resecured all the locks, and thankfully it stayed closed. This never happened again while we lived in that house, and shortly afterwards we moved out when the lease was up. The owner seemed very interested in getting us to buy the place instead of renting for another year, but as you can well imagine, we were having none of that. Now, thinking back on this as an adult, I can't help but wonder why he was so interested in selling. I was around 9 years old. We were visiting my mom's parents and stayed overnight. There was a storm that night, and the thunder woke me up. Constant lightning, but between flashes I could see a weird greenish glow coming from the hallway. I got out of bed and, being clumsy, absolutely bashed my hip against a little table in the cluttered and unfamiliar room. I would later wake with a giant bruise to prove this happened. I got to the hallway and realized the glow was coming from the room across the hall that my mom was sleeping in. I got to the doorway, and I could see what was glowing, a giant, like 3-foot-tall old woman's hand from the wrist up, not moving, like the fingers individually, but rotating slowly, the whole thing like a sculpture.
Yeah, my 9-year-old brain couldn't fathom what the F I was seeing any more than it makes sense to write out.
I just gaped at it. I watched it rotate and blindly took in the details, frozen in fear because it was so weird. I could see the paper thinness of the skin, the veins winding their way up, and the deep nail beds. It almost appeared to be composed of a faintly sickly luminescent light and wasn't exactly transparent, but you know how nighttime vision can appear grainy? I describe this thing as double grainy. That might not make sense, but it's the best way I've found to describe it. I finally started hoarsely yelling for Mom, who woke up. Her bed was across the room under the window, so I'd have to run past the thing to get to her. She didn't appear to see anything and called for me to come to her. So I gathered my courage and ran past. It didn't react, just kept rotating, and she gathered me up in bed and almost immediately went back to sleep. I continued to stare at this giant thing invading my reality until I eventually drifted to sleep. Morning, I woke with a big bruise on my hip. A mom convinced I was having a nightmare remembers me waking her up and climbing into bed but swears she saw nothing. I never figured out what it could have been, but it scared the hell out of me as a kid. I have quite a few stories, but people in the comments sharing their experiences of losing loved ones reminded me of a truly bizarre one I had years ago. My Nana had passed away, and, as many of us do when grieving, I was having dreams of her quite a bit. A few of them felt very much like a visit, she was so present. My mom, her daughter, was in town visiting, and we shared my bed. I dreamed of my Nana that first night, and in the dream the sky suddenly turned dark and tornadoes started closing in around us. Over the roar of the storms, my Nana was screaming out to me, "You girls wake up now. Wake up. Wake up." I shot up out of bed and could see through the blinds that the sky was that eerie orange and green that almost looks like daylight, but it was 4 a.m. I immediately turned on the TV and saw we had multiple tornado warnings and watches around us. To be fair, our area was located in a valley that allowed tornadoes to form around us, but they typically did not strike our specific location. I woke my mom up, and as we were watching the news, a branch hit my bedroom window and sprayed glass on the bed. Where we weren't. It wasn't a deadly risk, but I have never forgotten that. It was my Nana without a doubt. Guys, some unexplainable things are happening, and I need your advice. So I'm 17 years old, and my parents moved into my house when my mom was pregnant with me. This house is over 100 years old and used to be a plant orchard. My mom gets a strong sense of unease in one dark corner of the garden, she always has, and we don't know why. Just after I was born, my mom discovered that baby clothes were disappearing from the washing line for inexplicable reasons. One day, she went to that corner of the garden and asked whatever it was to stop stealing clothes. She said that she was happy to share the garden. The clothes stopped disappearing. I must admit, I always felt uncomfortable in that shady corner of the garden. Fast forward about 16 years, and over the UK lockdown we decided to build a tiki bar in the garden in that dark corner to cover it up. Since then, several unusual events have occurred. I was playing guitar in the bar one day, and suddenly I heard these loud footsteps pacing on the roof of the bar. They were too heavy to be a bird, they sounded human. When we were working on the bar, my dad was working on the roof, and I was in the bar, so I knew what human footsteps sounded like. I put my guitar down and ran out of the bar to see that there was nothing on the roof. Bear in mind that corner has always felt unsettling, but nothing has happened like this. It left me shaken, and I told my parents. A few months later, while we were all relaxing in the bar one night discussing the footsteps, a knock suddenly came from the wall outside. We laughed it off to brighten the mood, and it was killed with a loud bang that came from the roof. It sounded like someone punching it. This freaked us out. Fast forward to the most recent event, which happened the night before Halloween. We had 2 guests over, and they sat in this corner seat below a shelf with a heavy bongo drum on it. The bongo literally slid off the shelf and hit one of the guests in the head. There was no breeze because all doors and windows were sealed, and even if there was a breeze, the bongos are really heavy, so it wouldn't cause them to slide off the shelf. The bongos are always pushed way back to the wall, so they are always far from the edge of the shelf. I've got no photos or videos of paranormal activity, and no light orbs have been seen. Is this a ghost, poltergeist, or demon? I have a dog, and if those bongos fell on her, she'd definitely be dead. Should I be concerned? This was my first experience with the unexplainable. I'd like to preface this with a few points. 1. The event I am about to describe happened when I was a child. It is not made up, but it has been roughly 24 years since it happened. I think about it often, and it has never changed in my mind. But I am aware that a child's understanding of things is not the same as an adult's. 2. This will be the first time I've ever admitted something like this to an audience. I will do my best, but please listen with that in mind. Let's get started. I was about 5 or 6 when this took place. I was lying in bed one night. To the right of my bed I had a nightstand/bookshelf that contained a hood with a nightlight. As an adult I refused to sleep with a closet door open in my room, and perhaps this night was the cause of that. As a child, however, I had no problem with it. On the night in question, my closet door was open. It was a sliding closet door, the sort with 2 panels that overlap. The right side was about 3/4 of the way open because before bed I had cleaned my room. Of course, cleaning my room at that time meant tossing all of my toys in the bottom of my closet and showing my mom how clear my floor was. One of the toys in question was a doll called my buddy. As I lay in bed, nightlight on, I got a strange feeling. I tossed and turned and couldn't sleep. I started to look around my room and froze when I looked into my closet. I didn't see a monster or a ghost. In fact, I didn't see anything tangible at all. What I saw in my closet was a shadow. I froze for a moment staring at it, and in my head worked out that it must be the shadow from my buddy I had tossed in the closet earlier. So I got out of bed, went to the closet, found the doll, and pulled him out. I tossed him at the foot of my bed and crawled back in. Once back in bed, I pulled the covers over my head and lay there. Eventually I worked up the courage to pull them down, and to my fright, the shadow was still there. I couldn't think of anything else that might cast the shadow, but I still had that bad feeling and didn't want to see it anymore. So without taking my eyes off it, I reached over to my nightstand, to where the only source of light in my room was on. Now I have thought about this moment for years, and I have no reasonable way to explain what happened after I hit the switch. I know I was hoping that without light there could be no shadow. I was wrong. What I saw in the closet, I can only describe as a shadow that was darker than dark. A blackness that was more intense than the rest. What is a kid to do at this point but scream? My parents came rushing in, and I explained that there was a ghost in my closet and tons of other little kids' fantasies. My father looked at me and then took me to the closet. The shadow was gone. I never saw it again that night or any other. Looking back, I have no idea what was in there. Was there another source of light I wasn't aware of? If so, why didn't the shadow remain? Was it a kid's half-dreaming brain playing tricks on me? Was it something else? I can't say for sure, but I know that I think about it often. As I mentioned above, I lean toward skepticism, but I can remember how I felt that night, and it wasn't good. Anyway, I know it wasn't as captivating as other stories some people have, but it's true and has impacted me greatly. What do you guys think it could have been? I was staying in a cabin by a private lake in central Missouri. My buddy and I were sitting outside drinking beers and listening to music. It was dark, except for our lights from the cabin. We were in the middle of nowhere, so there were no city lights or cars nearby at all. I'm looking off into the sky, and I see these 3 bright orange orbs in a triangle formation appear suddenly. They were low, slightly higher than the tree line. They moved slowly but remained in the same formation. Then they very peacefully faded away. I shout, "Holy shit," and my buddy, who had his back to all this, asks me what's up. I explain to him what I saw and that I promise I'm not drunk and I'm not making this up. About that time, the lights reappear, and he sees them this time. Now I know it's legit. We walk closer to the shore for a better look, and I get my phone out. Just as I go to record video, they fade away again. We stand there and keep watching. Eventually, 2 more sets of these lights will pop up further away. Same as the others, flying really slow and low. I shit you not, every time I would manage to get my phone out to record, they would disappear. And any time I would keep recording, hoping they would pop back up, they would never appear. Eventually they stopped, and we never saw them again. Now I was skeptical at first. I am always skeptical about things like that. We were not far from an Air Force base. But these were not plane lights. My dad was stationed at that same base when I was a kid, and I was used to seeing those landing lights. My first thought was a B-2, because of their shape. But those planes do not have three bright orange, headlight-like lights spread out like that. And they certainly do not fly extremely low and could not have sustained flight at as slow a speed as these lights were moving. I really hope it was something extraterrestrial. I want to believe, and I have always wanted to see something like that. When I was a kid, there was an abandoned house next door to us. We were always curious as to what was in there. You could see things sitting on the porch and some things through the second-story window. Finally, one day when we were in our early teens, we decided to go in there. A friend of ours was standing in the driveway and swore up and down he had seen a little girl standing in the window. We all thought he was just playing a prank, but nonetheless we decided to go over to see it for ourselves. No one had lived in the house for at least 20 years. The police monitored the house for anyone who might be trying to sleep there secretly, but no one was ever discovered inside. Anyway, we go over, and first off, the floors are super old and cracking from the rain getting in. So we're trying to look around at the stuff inside. All of it had to be from the late 70s or 80s. This was the late 2000s. The house had to be made in the early 1900s. We come to these stairs with a door on them, and nobody will go up, but I could see light from the giant windows on the second story, so I knew I could try to get up there. It was pitch black everywhere else in the house since the windows were covered. I hadn't been scared of ghosts or thinking we'd find anything. I was more interested in the antiques and worried we'd be caught. A friend of mine goes first, and I follow behind her. But as soon as I start going up the stairs, my vision turns black, and I can't see anything. Not her, not anyone. Not even sunlight that was just visible at the top of the stairs. I tried to move around to look back, but I felt like I couldn't move, and I thought the others at the bottom of the stairs had shut the door trying to scare me. Then I couldn't hear anyone, and I tried to call out, but I felt like my voice was somehow muffled. I started hearing people screaming and someone calling my name faintly. I really started to freak out, thinking something was happening and that it wasn't just my friends trying to scare me. Out of nowhere it stops, and I'm hanging onto the stair railing like I was going to pass out. I regain consciousness and look up to see the light upstairs, with my friend staring at me in a panic. I got mad and said, "You guys shouldn't be scaring me like that." They all looked at me with bewilderment, insisting that they weren't scaring me and that I had just been standing still, not moving or responding to them. We went on upstairs to find nothing but a broken window and a million dead ladybugs all over the floor. We were going to look around, and I was hoping to take something home as a keepsake, but after all that, we just decided it wouldn't be a good idea. I had never experienced anything like that before and haven't since. I've never had any health issues with seizures or even had a problem with claustrophobia. I never found out who lived there or what happened to them, but a few years later the house burnt to the ground. So my great-grandpa was a very powerful landlord back in the day. The US version of landlord and where I am from are totally different. In my home country, this title means you own a large amount of land, oversee several villages, and receive a significant share of the crops grown on that land. Nobody can have the same name as you, and they have to bow down when they walk past your place/home. As usual, he didn't use his power well, and when he passed, his grave lit on fire. Long story short, I did not know where he was put to rest. One day, while playing hide and seek, I hid behind his gravestone and on top of it, where his head is laid. I heard the deepest and loudest hum and couldn't figure out where it came from. My cousins were with me, but they did not hear anything, just me. As a little kid I used to stay with my great-aunt a lot. She lived in the house that her grandparents built in the late 1800s. I mean, this house was incredibly old. She referred to the living room as the Davenport, while the basement had a dirt floor and many stories that I can't even begin to recount. Additionally, she owned these extremely old, large framed photographs of deceased loved ones, featuring metal filigree frames with bubble-like glass coverings. Lots of posthumous portraits of infants and beloved family members that got sick and died suddenly. I used to stare at them all the time as a kid. One day, while I was chatting with a portrait, I made friends with anyone or anything, lol, I noticed a man depicted in it who had an intricate mustache, combed over hair, foggy eyes, and a neck that wasn't sitting straight up. I felt a sudden chill run through me. I looked over my shoulder, and when I turned back around to look at the portrait, this ducking dude blinked at me. I yelled for my great-aunt and told her what I saw, and she laughed and said, "Ah yes, insert the name of the man in the portrait, has always been so lively, even after he died." He never blinked at me again, but also I swear the lace bonnet one of the posthumous baby portraits had on would shift differently. Sometimes the lace was up and perky, and sometimes it would fold down on the baby's face. It was never bad energy, just lively past relatives. Had an unforgettable, unexplainable experience years ago. When I was a teen, maybe 2017-ish, I was home alone and doing dishes in the kitchen with earbuds in. I was in a full jam session while scrubbing. Headbanging, dancing, and everything. When suddenly, I felt that instinctual feeling when someone is staring at you. When you turn your head without even thinking about it. And there, just maybe 2 feet away, was the silhouette of a man. Made of this blue hazy light. No discernible details, but you could tell from the shape it was a man. I paused, stunned and trying to process what I was seeing. He seemed to notice me looking back in that split second, and with literal blink and you'll miss it speed, he blurred down the hallway in a streak of blue light. I stood there frozen for maybe 3 to 5 seconds before I decided to follow simply to verify that no one was home. The entire house was empty. And I didn't see anything else that night. I tried to rationalize it, but my mind circled back to the moment I noticed eyes on me. How there had been no sound or movement to alert me because I could only hear music and was looking down into the sink. It was the feeling of eyes on me that made me look up. The human reaction of someone staring. Chills just thinking about it now. The kicker is, my grandfather had passed maybe a month prior to this, and he didn't get to see us much. On a separate occasion, when I had moved out as an adult, I was leaving my bedroom for a midnight snack. And when I opened the door, there was someone nearly face to face with me. I froze in the doorway, but I was more open to it this time. Same blue light silhouette but different stature, different person. No visual detail. But he felt familiar. His height, the point where we met, felt like standing in front of someone I used to know who'd long passed. I recognized him. Said his name like a question, blinked, and he was gone. Unexplained childhood experience. Okay. I know what you're about to listen is probably the most fictitious garbage. But I swear this happened to me. Can someone explain to me what I may have encountered when I was a child? 12 years have passed since this incident, and even now, as a relatively mature adult, I still cannot understand what happened. I was 11 years old when my family and I moved into a rural but modern house for rent. After a few months, sometimes at night I would hear the most blood-curdling screams from a woman. It sounded as if the woman was being murdered or something. She sounded like she was in so much pain and fear. These screams happened right into my ear, they were deafening. The creepy thing about it is, I was the only one who heard these screams. There would be times when all family members would be in the room when I heard this. I would literally jump and say, "Oh my God, did you guys hear that scream?" And everyone else was just so confused. I was convinced I was crazy, or one of my brothers was playing a prank on me. Until I was lying in bed one night, around 9:30 p.m.-ish. And this happened again. Smack bang in my heart. I was frozen petrified. I never thought anything of ghosts or spirits before, but this was the only answer I had in mind. My parents shrugged it off, saying it was A, my imagination. B, just the neighbors. Even though this was quite a rural house, the nearest neighbor was about 5 to 6 kilometers down the road. C, just an animal. We live in Australia, we have koalas, possums, and kangaroos, all of which love to roam about at night and can make squeaky, screechy noises. I'm very familiar with those sounds, and I doubt one was just in the room with me screaming into my eardrum like they were being axed into bits. These screams happened for a few weeks. Initially it was not every night but spaced out through the week. In the last week or so, I heard these screams every single night. Then bam. Stopped. I have not experienced a paranormal or unexplained event like that since. So, what? Was it a demon, an angry spirit, or just a brief moment of insanity? What do you think? Lived in a small village for a few years as a teenager. Down the road on the corner there was this small white bungalow, which, if you passed, led along a stone bridge and eventually down to a river the kids used to dam up every summer to go swimming. I absolutely loathed walking past that house. I would walk as close to the opposite wall as I could, force myself to keep a steady pace, and force myself to not look at the single window overlooking the bridge and road. I always had this incredibly strong sensation that someone was standing there watching. I can still remember the feeling of fear. My brother is a couple of years younger than me, slightly spiritual in the same sense, as in we both believe in the paranormal. We were walking back home just talking about random events in our lives, a real one-to-one, when we passed under the huge trees shading the house. They started to rustle, but there was no wind. My brother asked me if it felt like someone was watching us. Of course, yes, I answered, it always did to me, and I bet if I went back there I would still feel it. There was a slight pause in the conversation while we got our bearings while walking when it happened. We had just passed a lamppost standing before a gate to the garden of the house. I will reiterate, we had literally just walked past this. The lamppost was lit, it was dusk. We both swiveled our heads around to look at what was manifesting/materializing before our eyes. Underneath the lamppost, I literally watched the form of a person emerge. It was pure black, my brother saw white, as if someone had cut out the figure from the world, like you would in a magazine, say, with a black background. I swear, the way the figure reacted, it felt like it had just realized that we were staring at it, that we could see it. It started from underneath the lamppost and moved diagonally across the bridge to the side we were just walking on. I noticed it didn't really have any distinct legs and was more wispy on the bottom, but moved not with the normal bob of a human gait but with a steady, rolling movement. Once it reached the other side of the road, it simply vanished. It literally disappeared into thin air, before my eyes. I clung tightly to my brother's arm and told him I was afraid. He told me to keep a steady pace and not run. We both knew that if either of us ran, we would completely lose it mentally and freak out. So we kept walking, steadily, past the house. We kept the walk steady the entire way home, which was only a 5-minute walk, but it was tough not to break into a run. Later found out from someone who used to live in the house that it is haunted by an old woman who was neglected by her family and died in her bed. Apparently the woman heard her crying upstairs when she was painting a room and shouted up to her to be quiet and stop making noise if she didn't like the paint. I don't even know if I would go back to that area if you paid me. Unexplainable. About 2 years ago, my son and I were home alone. My then boyfriend was out of town in a different state for work. I was putting laundry away when I heard him, clear as day, say, "Hey, you there?" I chalked it up to me hearing things. It's not unusual for me to hear someone say my name when no one is around. It was a little unusual because it was a complete sentence rather than just my name, so I peeked around the corner at the front door to check and see that it was still locked. What really freaked me out, though, was when my son came running down the hall and asked if my boyfriend was back because he heard him too. I've never been so freaked out in my life. My apartment at the time only had one point of entry, which was the front door, and it was definitely locked. I can't explain it, and I think about that moment all of the time. I'm not sure how to explain what happened last night. This may sound unbelievable, especially since it occurred on Halloween night, but here we go. My boyfriend and I live together in a lower ground floor flat. The house the flat is part of is one of the classic British Victorian terraced houses. I admit that I am a person who is highly suggestible. I believe in ghosts and the paranormal, but my partner does not. Over time, I became accustomed to convincing myself that any strange noise or feeling was merely a product of my imagination and could be logically explained. We never really experienced anything weird in the house, just the usual creaks and noises of old buildings. Last night, we both stayed awake late. My boyfriend was engaged in playing video games, while I was reading a book. Consequently, we went to bed around 1:30 a.m., as both of us had to work from home the following day. I have been taking the Sleep Easy pill for the past 2 weeks to sleep better. It does make me have weird dreams sometimes, but as I often have a hard time falling asleep, I thought it might help restore a healthy sleeping pattern. Not long after I fell asleep, I got a weird feeling as if someone was hovering over me, and I thought my boyfriend maybe woke up to go pee or get water. I opened my eyes, and there was a human-shaped figure, completely dark like a shadow and quite tall, at the end of my bed. For a split second, I thought the figure was my boyfriend, but I couldn't focus on it clearly, which gave me a spooky feeling. So, I closed my eyes and then reopened them to see different smaller shadows almost dissipating around me. Again, as I thought the Sleep Easy pill was making me lucid dream, I then told myself I was just seeing things, rolled over, and fell back asleep. After a while, I woke up and again had the same feeling of someone being in the room, but this time I didn't even open my eyes and went back to sleep, both because I was scared and because I would rather not fuel what I thought was my imagination. This morning, I woke up and thought nothing of my experience, not even considering mentioning it to my boyfriend, who is very skeptical. I had genuinely convinced myself that it was all in my head. We were making coffee in the kitchen this morning, and he tells me he had a weird night's sleep, that he was feeling so tired and fell asleep straight away, but then he woke up all of a sudden because he felt there was a presence as if someone was in the room. He said he looked around the room and towards the door, and nothing was there, and he went back to sleep. Needless to say, I felt my blood run cold and got chills all over when I told him that I had experienced the exact same thing and shared my story with him. I also asked him if he could tell at what point of the night this was, and he said not long after we initially went to bed, which is exactly what it was for me. Honestly, we are both a bit spooked and freaked out. Again, my boyfriend is very skeptical, but even he cannot understand how this happened to both of us. To comfort me, my boyfriend suggested that it might be one of our deceased relatives watching over us. However, the feeling I experienced was very uneasy and dark, leading me to doubt that explanation. Has anyone experienced this? Are we going insane, or is this just some sort of sleep paralysis thing? Regardless of the situation, I plan to buy sage today. I've only ever told this to 2 people. About 5 to 6 years ago, I used to live in a really small apartment downtown. My place was on the bottom floor, halfway underground, on the rear corner of the building, and adjacent to the driveway that led to the building's parking lot and dumpster in the back. I got back home late one night, between 12 and 1 a.m. My dogs had been alone for several hours, so I took them on a brief walk. It was a weeknight, so everything was dead quiet, and no one was outside. As we were returning home, one of my dogs started acting weird. Not scared, or particularly excited, but just completely fixated, like she'd picked up a scent or something and wanted to check it out. She started pulling the leash, which she never did. As we got closer to my building, she frantically pulled me and my other dog towards the driveway. We always went up the driveway after walks to dispose of their waste bags and enter the rear of the building where my apartment was, so I thought maybe she just wanted to get home for water or something. As soon as we got towards the driveway, she got in front of me to protect me and completely froze and stared. She was only about 40 pounds, but she was half-guard dog, and something made her alert and serious. I took her cue, looked down the driveway, and saw something even blacker than the surrounding darkness. At first, I thought I saw a small black dog or a raccoon, as some of my other neighbors had small dogs, and we would occasionally get raccoons in our dumpster. After a few seconds I realized it wasn't either of those things. The thing made eye contact with me and started to walk towards us. As soon as it got next to the building, I realized how big it was, as it literally stood right next to my apartment and window. The creature hovered 4 feet above the ground, resembling a hybrid of a wolf and a bear. It was completely black, but it looked like the black was distorted or out of place, almost like how a black hole is portrayed when it is absorbing light around it. It had a few gray squiggles in the black that moved erratically, and its eyes glowed gray with a small hint of red. It looked almost like someone animated it, completely out of place in reality. When it got to the corner of the building, it stopped and stared at me, and my dog completely lost its shit. I had witnessed that dog barking to protect me, barking at other dogs and cats, and barking at wild animals, but this was the only occasion when I had ever seen her bark in such a manner. She was howling, barking, and almost yodeling simultaneously and was completely freaked out. My second dog was quiet and looked almost confused at first, just staring down the driveway. After a few seconds it was like he finally noticed what my other dog did, and he started doing the same thing, except he sounded a lot more afraid. This next part still freaks me out when I think about it. I was frozen in shock, but the thing opened its mouth and showed some teeth with more distortion and gray squiggles coming in and out of it. Its eyes glowed more than before, gray and red, almost like smoke. It let out a penetrating sound like a guttural growl, and my entire body felt it like it went through me. I strangely felt like I was connected to it somehow, and that really scared me. It stared like it was looking through me for a little while longer, I'm not sure how long, and then it walked away from the driveway towards the back of the building and disappeared. I stood there dumbfounded for a couple of minutes wondering what the hell just happened and contemplating whether or not to go inside. The building was locked on both sides, but all of this took place literally right next to the window to my bedroom. After a few more minutes it started to feel like it didn't even happen. Still, there was no way in hell. I was walking down that driveway, so I went in through the front of the building, threw the dog's waste bags out in the laundry room, went into my apartment, locked the door, checked my gun next to my bed, and invited both my dogs to sleep on the bed with me. I couldn't sleep for hours, but my dog that tried to protect me passed out almost immediately. The only time I've ever seen her so terrified was when her tiny heart was pounding in her chest. I lived there 9 years, and nothing like that ever happened before or since. Upon our marriage in 1998, my spouse and I lived in his 2-story home within a quiet and nice neighborhood. One night, while in bed, I distinctly heard a disembodied child's voice say, "Mama?" Startled, I stayed still until my husband and I simultaneously turned to face each other. He then asked me, "Did you hear that?" I replied, "What did you hear?" He confirmed hearing a child's voice saying, "Mama?" It was unsettling. It was late, with no traffic and no animal activity. My daughter from a previous marriage was at her dad's, so it wasn't her. The voice came from my side of the bed. Fortunately, neither of us has experienced this again. We moved a year later. It would be interesting if the new homeowners have also encountered this spooky happening. Even though I don't know them, I am inclined to start up a conversation with the current owners, not the child voice. I have a vivid memory from when I was 8 years old. I opened the door to my room and had to stop because it looked very different. The furniture was rearranged, and it just didn't look like my room, though it clearly was. There was a man standing and looking out of the window, his back to me. I froze in fear and couldn't move or speak. I let out a tiny sorry before closing the door and running downstairs to tell my parents. They called the police, who came within minutes, and I got in trouble because everything was completely normal in my room. I couldn't believe it when I went up to see for myself. Sure enough, everything was in order. Years later, I was 18 and living in the same house. Some new people moved into the house next door a while back, and they had a cute daughter. I noticed she was out in their yard and stood there like a creepy teenager, just staring at her. I was jolted by a child saying sorry behind me and the door closing. Suddenly, I remembered what happened when I was a kid. I ran downstairs and asked my mom about what happened the time the police came. She recalled the incident, so it wasn't in my imagination. It's been almost a decade, and I've said nothing about this incident to anyone, ever. An unsettling and unexplained experience. When I was around 16 years old, my auntie was heavily pregnant with my youngest cousin. She had 2 kids, and the third was on its way this night. It was the night she was placed into the hospital for birth, and I had to babysit the 2 eldest cousins whilst she was in. They were asleep upstairs in their bedroom, and I decided to place myself in the living room downstairs to watch TV and be with the dogs. As it was getting late, I decided I'd get a few hours of sleep. As I got comfortable with both dogs with me on the sofa, I started to drift asleep. As I was almost about to fall asleep, the border collie shot upright, tail stiff and straight, staring at the door to the stairs. I took no notice of this and told him to get sleep, as it may have been a car in the street late at night. As soon as I said this, I heard the most petrifying, loudest banging I've ever heard. It was as if someone with boots on was slamming their feet running up the stairs, and when I say running, I mean literally sprinting up. I shot up mid-panic attack and opened the door to allow both dogs to run up in case someone had broken in. I followed quickly behind to run into the kids' room, where they were both fast asleep and the dogs were staring into the corner of their room. All other rooms were empty, no one was inside apart from us. I woke both the kids up and brought them downstairs to sleep on the sofa with me. I also brought both dogs into the living room. I didn't sleep after this and waited till my aunt and uncle both got home. I mentioned this only briefly to them, and my uncle said it's a common occurrence. What could this be? Could this be malicious? A night alone with my grandparents. I'm going to tell you about an experience that still haunts me today. The event occurred approximately a decade ago, yet I can still vividly recall every detail as if it were yesterday. I'm not trying to convince you that it was supernatural. I just want to share what I experienced. My grandparents had a house in a small country village. An old building, full of character but also gray areas, with incessant creaking noises and a smell of humidity clinging to the walls. I had spent a good part of my childhood there, but that night I was alone there for the first time. They had gone to visit family, and since I was on vacation, I agreed to watch the house. Everything was going well until nightfall. The house then became a different entity. Every noise seemed amplified, every shadow seemed alive. Around 11 p.m., I sat down in the living room to watch a film, just to take my mind off things. I was halfway through the movie when I heard footsteps upstairs. Not the kind of random creaking of old houses. They were regular, slow, almost calculated steps. At first I thought it must be a sound illusion. The brain can play tricks, especially in a place that already puts nerves on edge. But as I listened, the footsteps started again. This time, they were going down the stairs. I have never been so frozen in my life. I wanted to rationalize. Maybe water infiltration in the walls, a problem with the plumbing, anything. But what made my blood run cold was that I heard the last step stop exactly at the level of the living room door. There was no light. All I could hear was my own breathing and this stifling silence, as if the house itself was holding its breath. I took my phone and turned on the flashlight. With a slowness I never imagined possible, I lit the door. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. But I could feel something. A presence. I didn't sleep that night. The noises stopped, but this feeling of being watched never left me. When my grandparents came back, I didn't say anything. I didn't want them to think I was crazy. It was only years later that I told this story to my grandmother. She turned pale, and after a long silence, she said to me, "We never wanted to tell you this, but before we bought the house, a man died here. Maybe it's just a coincidence. But he collapsed at the top of the stairs." Since then, I refused to stay alone in this house. Was it my imagination? A projection of irrational fear? I don't know. But part of me is convinced there was something. Once a few years ago, I had a long break, and I was asleep in my bedroom of my family home. On that day, I woke up a little later than usual, during the early afternoon. After washing my face and brushing my teeth, then getting dressed, I stepped out of my bedroom and went to the living room area. Once there, the television was on, yet no one was there. I thought it rather unusual, as it was the afternoon time, when regularly I'd find someone lounging there. I continued through the living room and saw the door to my parents' bedroom slightly open. I stepped in. Their bedroom is rather large and has its own kind of lounge area. At the very end of it, roughly 10 yards away, besides a few tall wooden cabinets, I saw my mother quietly standing there, just staring at me. And for some reason, she was all dressed up, as if ready to go out. I looked her way and said, "Good morning, Mom. Are you going out somewhere?" But she just silently stood there, with an unblinking stare. After a few awkward moments of silence, I repeated, "Good morning, Mom." Yet she just stood there, completely still, her stare wider, still fixated on me. "Mom. Good morning," I repeated in a louder voice. And in that instant, from the dressing room, just a few yards away from where I stood, I could hear my mother's voice. "Yes. Good morning. I'm changing. How many times are you going to say good morning?" she said. "Heard you the first time." In that moment, I stood stricken with horror as I realized that what stood there was not my mother. My thoughts raced, yet I had not the slightest idea what was standing right in front of me, as the silent figure stood there staring back at me. I said a few prayers as my hands and lips began to tremble. In that instant, the image began to dissolve into a very unusual black smoke that quickly dissipated and dissolved into the surroundings, and in just a few moments, the smoke was completely gone from sight. Just a few seconds later, my mother stepped out of her dressing room. I took a deep breath in and quickly regained my composure. We began with the usual small talk. Yet I decided not to tell her what I saw, as I'm aware that it'll just upset her, so I decided it would be wiser not to tell her. Besides, if I ever did, she may refuse to sleep in her bedroom for the remainder of the month. Alright. At the risk of sounding completely crazy, I'll tell my story. This isn't a typical ghost story or anything, but it's something I've never been able to explain nonetheless. Years ago, like in the very late 90s, I worked in a department store. It was a typical day, and a coworker and I were just chatting while handling small tasks. At some point, I'm sure it had something to do with the conversation, but I can't remember the context. I made a comment about how people with natural blonde hair and brown eyes are an oxymoron. My coworker was like, hello? Because she was a natural blonde with brown eyes. We both had a giggle about me being dense, and then I started asking questions about the prevalence of that in her family. She started talking about it, vaguely at first, but then she started talking about her brother. As she is telling me about him, I see him. Like a vision in my mind. So I start asking questions she hadn't previously answered while talking about him. Does he have a darker, like olive, complexion? She was very pale in comparison. There's no way I could have known that if it weren't for what I was seeing. Yes, he actually does. Is he, like, really young, maybe 6 or 7 years old? Mind you, we are both adults, so I had no reason to think he was a young child if it weren't for what I was seeing. Yes, he's 7. Why? I asked another question. Does he have this hairstyle? And I described what I saw. She was getting uncomfortable but answered anyway, yeah, how the hell do you know that? I explained to her that as soon as she started talking about him, this picture of him just popped into my head. I could see him as clearly as I could see her. I was so dumbfounded by the situation that we both thought it was freaky and exclaimed, "What the hell is happening?" However, since there was no harm done, she then asked, "Well, what about my uncle?" While I had no idea who the hell her uncle was, once again a vision popped into my mind, and I started describing him, down to his style of dressing. At this point, she was both excited and weirded out, and I was too, so she ran over to a neighboring department to tell another coworker about what I was doing. A minute or two later, they are both walking towards me, the first coworker still talking, with this incredulous smile on her face. They approached me, and the second coworker said, "Okay, do me." And she just stood there, arms crossed, staring at me with a grin on her face. No context was given, no clue as to what I'm doing, but it happened. A vision popped into my head, so I started describing to her what I saw. "Okay, well this is weird, but I see a baby. But it's like tiny. Like I could fit it in my hand. But it's a fully formed baby with arms, legs, fingers, and toes. And it seems so happy. It's just really small." Because I was paying attention to what I could see so I could describe it, I didn't see her facial expressions. The next thing I knew, she was running to the back stockroom, crying, and the first coworker was going after her. I didn't immediately follow, but after a few minutes had passed, I went back to check on her, to make sure she was okay, and to figure out what just happened. Well, come to find out, she had just had a miscarriage a few days before. None of us knew she was even pregnant. I felt like utter shit. With that news, I said, okay, nope, never doing that again. And, to this day, I never have. I still don't know how I saw what I saw. I didn't even talk to these people outside of work. This has remained the one thing that is burned into my memory that I have never been able to explain away. At approximately 14 years of age, I awoke very early in the morning to an individual entering my bedroom. I am very nearsighted without my glasses. I saw someone open my bedroom door and turn the light on from the switch. Important, I was/am scared of the dark, and I turned the light in my bedroom off from the pull chain on the ceiling fan routinely. I then saw someone standing at the foot of my bed. At first I thought it was my younger brother, and I was annoyed with him for coming in my room. I started asking him, "What?" No response. Then I noticed the hair was too light to be his. Assumed it was his friend. Again, I asked, "What?" Then I realized the person had no lower body. It was a head and torso with no pants/legs. I then did what I call swearing a prayer and said, "Jesus, get this thing out here," and it disappeared. I got up and looked around. My mom was asleep. So was my brother. I know he was really asleep and not faking because he sleeps with his hands over his junk and doesn't realize it. My dad was up, but he's over 6 feet tall. There was no mistaking him for a teenage boy. I never saw the thing again. That house was always creepy, and it is still dark even though it has many windows. My folks still live there. It's been years, but when I was 25, I got my first apartment alone. No roommates. I was ecstatic, because I tend to feel drained around people and I need my solitude. In my mind, this was perfect. I'd even had a dream a year beforehand of finding a place with this exact layout. The place was a 1-bedroom garden apartment. The building itself was a duplex, with only one door in/out, but 3 windows I could easily climb out of, if needed. It's at the corner of a very dangerous curve. Guardrails were installed because of all the vehicles that wrecked in this particular area. It's also 2 blocks away from a huge cemetery in a major city. When you enter the building, you go down a set of maybe 5 steps, turn left, and the first door to the left is the community laundry room for me and the other 2 floors' tenants. But if you keep going straight, maybe 15 to 20 feet, it leads to the front door of my cute little apartment. Everything seemed normal the first few weeks. Besides an eerie feeling in the bedroom, I just loved it. But I couldn't bring myself to sleep in the bedroom. I slept on my couch. Maybe a month in, I'd hear cabinets opening in the kitchen, and it sounded like someone was trying to get dishes or silverware, but quietly. It seemed as if they were trying not to wake me. I'd get up to check but found nothing out of place. I even had the landlord check for rodents. No evidence of any infestation, though. So I just started sleeping with the TV on so the bumps in the night didn't bother me as much. A couple of weeks pass, and I find myself being woken up every night between 2 and 4 a.m. by incredibly loud banging coming from the laundry room. It went on for hours, the entire summer. It sounded like 2 raccoons fighting inside the dryer. A friend spent the night and bravely went to check out the noise. As soon as he opened the door to the laundry room, the banging stopped. Neither machine was on. In fact, the rule was no laundry could be started after 8:30 p.m. Yes, before anyone asks, there was a working carbon monoxide detector in my apt. I thought I was going crazy until friends who'd stayed the night experienced weird things too. One said she'd never come over again. The scariest part, though, was the tapping, which only happened in the bedroom. I'd started having my boyfriend spend the night so I could sleep in my bed without the TV on. That's when I could finally prove to him that something was going on inside the walls. The tapping would start on one side of the room and gradually move to the other wall, over my bed, then inside the closet, and work its way back. This occurred each night, between 2 and 4 a.m. It wasn't the pipes or an animal. Whatever it was trying to get my attention. One night, we decided to tap back. It mimicked the beat. For every unique beat we came up with, the thing that kept me up at night would repeat it back. Despite all of this, I really didn't want to move. After 5 years, my landlord passed away. The building went into foreclosure, and the new owner gave me 30 days notice to move out. Other things happened there, but these repeated events scared me the most. Not only did I witness this, but also my brother, who we will be calling H. We witnessed this at the same exact time, but he was the first one to see it. We were both sick and home alone during the day. We were in our separate rooms, engaged in our usual activities, when H ran into my room, terrified out of his mind. He proceeds to tell me, as panicked as he is, that he saw someone downstairs walking around. This scared me, too, as the possibility of someone breaking into the house wasn't entirely out of the picture at this point. So, being the older sibling, I grabbed a weapon and walked towards the stairs to see what was happening. He was standing by me, too scared to be alone, as I looked around from the top of the stairs to see if I saw anyone. I didn't, at least not right now. But H insisted. I then saw what he was panicking about. Around the entrance to one of the rooms downstairs, someone, or something, peeks around the corner and just stares up at me. I froze in my place and processed this information in case it had turned out to be an intruder and realized they had no facial features whatsoever. No eyes, no nose, not even a mouth. They weren't even wearing a mask, I would have been able to tell. He noticed I was watching something and looked too, then started freaking out worse than he already was. Then, this thing started crawling out of its place and up towards us. We both ran at this point, only to return seconds later out of sheer curiosity. It had gone by then. Having to be the responsible one, I led the journey down the stairs to investigate what had happened, and we saw nothing. No signs of a break-in were seen either, not to mention our alarm system would have gone off if that were the case, but we double-checked anyways. This experience was terrifying, to say the least, and definitely out there. I believe it to be paranormal, as H continues to see the figure ever so often. I've seen a few singular ghosts that were undeniably ghosts, but I was always by myself, and nobody could corroborate it. But about 25 years ago, I was living on Martha's Vineyard in an old cottage up at the top of the island. About 250 feet away, there was another old, but much larger, summer house, and some people said it was haunted. The owners lived on the west coast, and they usually left the place empty for most of the summer, so it was always dark and nobody was ever there. One night I was outside with my roommate having a cigarette, and we noticed that there was a light on in one of the upstairs windows. This was strange because it was usually dark. There were no cars parked outside, and this place is far out in the country, so there aren't really any neighbors. Then all of a sudden another light came on, this time on the lower level of the house in an area where there was a huge screened-in porch. We could see a group of people inside, and they all looked like they were having a dinner party. It was maybe 20 or 25 people all gathered around a couple of long tables, and they seemed to be enjoying themselves, and they weren't looking at us. Behind a mesh screen, we could see men and women who appeared to be from the 1930s or 1940s, however, they were clearly real people and did not resemble ghosts, or what people typically think of as ghosts. Before we could fully comprehend what we were seeing, everything went dark. This all took place in a matter of 10 seconds or less, and suddenly it was just an empty old house again without any lights on. We both screamed at the top of our lungs, and we didn't really even know what to do. We jumped up and down, speechless yet still yelling, howling, and completely freaked out. My roommate actually wet her pants. We couldn't grasp what we'd seen. The entire house was empty again, and there were no people at all. I want to add that we weren't on any drugs, nor were we drinking. We were completely sober, so it wasn't like we were tripping. We told the owners of our rental what had happened the next day, and they told us that the big house in front of us had once been a restaurant a long time ago. They didn't even act like what we saw was crazy, which was also really weird. They didn't say it was a normal occurrence, but they just didn't act as surprised as we thought they should be. It wasn't even as though these people were menacing or threatening. Absolutely nothing bad happened. But I've never seen anything like that before, and I hope I don't ever see anything like that again. We would rather not stay at our cottage after that. We only had a few weeks left before the summer was over, and nothing bizarre occurred. But that's the most disturbing thing I've ever seen, and I don't even really know what I saw. If I hadn't been with somebody else, I wouldn't have trusted my eyes. Whenever I tell people this story, I still wonder whether I saw what I think I did. I was alone in my house one winter, talking aloud to myself about how I couldn't find my toque, like a knitted hat that goes over the years. I hadn't seen it in ages, and after digging through the last pile of laundry mess in my room, I gave up and went to the bathroom. When I came out, the hat in question was neatly displayed on the hallway floor, facing the bathroom door. This has happened a couple more times with things I lost, as I tend to leave stuff everywhere. Usually it'll turn up somewhere, placed neatly where I will see it, within the next few days. A few years ago I, 31 female, went to Budapest with a couple of friends, also 31F, to celebrate my birthday. We stayed in a small but very nice holiday rental in a block of flats in the old town. On the day we arrived, our flight had been delayed, and we couldn't find the entrance to the flat right away, so we arrived later than planned and headed straight out, as we had a wine tasting booked. We got home late that night and went to bed. The next morning one of my friends had gone out for a run, and the other one was lounging around, so I was the first one to go into the bathroom to take a shower. They had one of those hotel-style bath mats, kind of like a thick towel, which I unfolded and put on the floor outside the shower. I'm certain it was clean and dry when I put it down. I got in the shower, and when I was done, just before I stepped out, I looked down and noticed 2 large footprints on the bath mat. They looked like men's footprints and were facing away from the shower. I initially thought they must be stains or dirt left on the bath mat, but then I realized that there were also several wet footprints of the same size leading from the bath mat to the door, which I had locked. I was a little startled by this, quickly wrapped myself in a towel, opened the door, and checked if the wet footprints were elsewhere in the flat, but they seemed to stop at the inside of the bathroom door. There was no window in the bathroom, no one but me had been in the shower since we'd arrived, and there hadn't been any wet patches at all on the floor previously. The bathroom was very small, so I would have noticed them. They were very blatantly footprints. No water dripping from the ceiling either. No one but us was in the flat, and we had actually dead-bolted the front door from the inside overnight and while my friend was on her run. I didn't tell either of my friends because one of them believes in ghosts and would have freaked out at the thought of a ghost in the house, and the other one would have thought there was an intruder and felt uncomfortable. Still struggling to explain this one. When I was about 7 to 8, I lived in these apartments. It had 2 stories, the bottom had a living room and kitchen. The top, bathroom and rooms. And of course there were stairs. Anyways, one night, I was unable to sleep. My sister and I shared a room, while my brother had his own, and my mom had her own as well. As I was lying there, forcing myself to try and sleep, I began hearing footsteps on the stairs. For some odd reason, I assumed it was my aunt coming up the stairs. But soon enough, I was wrong. The footsteps never stopped, never came to the top, and never went to the bottom. It sounded as if they were not moving at all. The footsteps felt like they were going on forever. The footsteps sounded like someone wearing chanclas, flip-flops. Of course my curious little self got up to try and check it out. But once I got to the rail of the stairs, I couldn't bring myself to look. It felt as if all this sad energy just hit me. I couldn't move or speak, all I did was cry and cry and cry. I wanted to run to my mom's room because of how scared I was, but I had to pass the stairs to make it to her room. Again, I just couldn't do it. I was scared and frightened, I didn't know what to do but cry and whimper. The footsteps just seemed to be getting louder, it sounded as if they were never going to stop. Finally I had the urge to move myself, and I ran to my room, jumped on my bed, and covered myself with my blanket. I tried so hard to ignore the footsteps, but I couldn't, they were there, being loud, never stopping. Sooner or later, I was able to fall asleep. I never said anything, because I'm too scared to bring it up, and I had no idea how to explain what I felt and heard. Then we moved away from that place, years passed, and I grew older and more mature in my words. I brought it up to my mom one day, and all she ever says to me is I have demons and need to repent. Gosh, dang it, woman, after all those years, I get this? Another time, it happened in the same apartment, same age range, same everything. Me, my sister, and a friend of ours were having a sleepover, of course at my place. We were playing dress up in my mom's room. Dancing and jumping, doing little girl things. After that, we got tired of jumping so much, so we lay on the bed to catch our breaths. Then, we hear this door creak. I looked up to see what it was the door. I assumed it was my little brother wanting to play with us, so I screamed at the door, "Go away, insert name. We don't want to play with you, this is only for us girls." The door then slowly opened to about a 180-degree crack. I got up frustrated that he wouldn't let us play by ourselves. I swung open the door quickly before he could get away, but when I opened it, I saw nothing, and I absolutely heard no one giggling or going down the steps. I turned around to my sister and our friend and screamed. After I screamed, they screamed as well. We ran downstairs fast. I saw my brother there on the couch playing his racing games and my mom in the kitchen cooking. I started screaming at my brother for scaring us and telling him that it wasn't funny. My mom responded, "He's been down here the whole time." I have not yet shared this story with my mother, however, I am certain of her response, rendering the attempt unnecessary. There were many more things that happened, but these were the major ones that just stuck with me through the years. I saw someone I knew when they were not there. I've never believed in anything supernatural. I have never believed in the existence of ghosts, spirits, cryptids, gnomes, or goblins. I'm an atheist through and through. However, there is one experience from when I was 8 years old that continues to cause me to doubt what I observed that day. Back then, I lived in my home country. Our house sat right next to my grandparents' place on the same property. The two houses were separated only by a small hill that started at the front gate and sloped up to the stairs leading to my grandparents' door. I grew up with my paternal cousins, who were basically my sisters. They'd spend every other week at my grandparents' house with my aunt and the other weeks with their dad since my aunt and uncle were divorced. One day I was lying on the hammock on our front porch, half dozing, when I saw one of my cousins walking up from the gate toward my grandparents' house. She was wearing her favorite green dress with the little lemon patterns on it. I remember it clearly because she loved that dress, it was her thing. I called out her name and waved. She turned, gave me her usual shy half smile, half frown, and waved back before continuing up the hill toward the house. I didn't think much of it at first until I realized she and her sister were supposed to be at their dad's place. I was confused at first but decided to brush it off. Maybe plans had changed. After probably about 5 minutes, I decided to head over to my grandparents' house and see if she wanted to play. When I walked into the kitchen, I saw my aunt standing by the counter. I hugged her and asked where my cousin was. She looked at me like I'd just said something strange. "She's not here this week," she said. "She's at her dad's. She'll be here next week, and you two can play then." I froze. I told her I'd just seen my cousin walking up to the house in her green dress not even 10 minutes ago. My aunt frowned and shook her head. "No, sweetheart. She's not here." My grandma overheard and came over, equally confused. She confirmed the same thing. My cousin hadn't been there at all that day. My aunt had literally just dropped her off at her dad's earlier that morning. I remember just standing there, trying to make sense of it. I knew what I saw. I knew the way she smiled, the way she waved, and the exact dress she was wearing. It wasn't a trick of the light or some shadow, it had to have been her. Could they have been pranking me? Maybe. But that doesn't fit. My aunt's not the joking type, and she looked genuinely concerned when I insisted I'd seen her daughter. To this day, I have no explanation. Maybe it was a trick of my young mind, some kind of misfiring memory or a vivid hallucination. But the memory is crystal clear, as real as any other. And even though I don't believe in anything supernatural, that day still makes me wonder. My ex-wife and I threw a party and invited a few different friend groups. At one point 2 roommates were talking about how they thought their attic was haunted and wanted to use a Ouija board, but their third roommate was against it. As the party ended, they invited me, my wife, and a third friend, who, to my knowledge, they had met that night, over to play Mario Kart and finish the night. They brought up the Ouija board again and decided to go for it because their other roommate was out. I didn't touch the board myself but watched. I don't trust them. They were doing it 2 people at a time. They didn't get any results if it was the guys, but when the ex-wife was on, they got answers. It was the same no matter who she was with. A lot of the answers didn't seem like they made sense until I noticed and pointed out the letters were being mixed up. As if it were a person with dyslexia. She was able to give a first name, said she was born in Canada, couldn't give an age but said she was young. After the question about death, the answers stopped making sense. Seeming to be random words and then a repeating series of numbers. I told them to ask if it was still the girl or something else. It said it was the girl, but when asked a second time, it said it wasn't and then ignored all questions, just doing the numbers. I told them they should stop and explained how you were supposed to do that. The people on the board said it was hard to say goodbye. Then we drank more and played Mario Kart. The third roommate came home and saw the board in the attic and was angry. Later that night, the board flew down the steps. It would have had to go from the attic, around a corner to the stairs, and then around another landing. The third roommate came out of his room after it hit the ground on the first floor, and his room was at the far end of the hall. If he threw it, he would have had to have been able to go to his room in seconds and then pretend to come out, asking what was happening. I don't believe my ex-wife faked it. She was really upset by the situation and never wanted to talk about it again. The roommates could have come up with the idea, but they didn't even initially start talking about it with me or my ex-wife. Also, like I said, the third guy didn't know them to my knowledge. He also wanted to bang my ex-wife, so I don't think he would try to scare her. In addition, I was the one that made the connection to dyslexia and that the person they were speaking to had changed. It was either an incredible improv performance put on for no real reason other than freaking us out or something that I can't explain. Unexplainable experience last night. So about a week ago I was walking around my apartment complex at night listening to tunes, as I enjoy doing that often. The neighborhood I live in is very woodsy. I live in NH, and only consists of apartment buildings that are spread apart. It gets pretty dark outside, there are lights by the buildings, but the main road in the neighborhood is always dark, with there barely being any streetlights. It actually can be pretty sketchy walking around at night sometimes, but I got used to it over time. Anyway, I go out on my walk like any normal night. I leave the lit area around my building and walk up my building's driveway onto the dark main road sidewalk and start walking. I was walking for a while when all of a sudden, I noticed in the far sky there was a random little orbish flicker of light floating in the sky. It looked really far away, like a helicopter or something. Which wouldn't be weird because right beyond the tree line of my neighborhood in that direction there was a hospital. On some nights I would hear the emergency helicopter and see it fly over the neighborhood to the roof of the hospital. But this specific night I was confused, because I didn't hear anything, it was just this light in the sky. The color of the light was the same color as white Christmas lights, if you know what I'm talking about. It grew more and more brighter. I thought it was a meteor or some shit. It looked like it was moving around very slightly. I'm walking toward this light on my street when I decide to text my girlfriend about what I'm seeing. While walking, I looked down at my phone and opened my phone camera. When I looked up, the sky was obstructed by a tree branch from a tree that I was next to. I move out from under the tree, and there is no more light, just the dark sky now. It was kind of weird, but I didn't think much of it at the time. I just kept walking and eventually went in. Nothing weird happened or anything. But this shit. I can't really explain this. So last night I went for a walk around the neighborhood again. I walked for about an hour and started to get tired, so I decided that I was going to go in for the night. So I'm walking in my driveway towards my building, and I notice a guy leaves his car in the parking lot. He makes his way towards the building. He was going towards where I was going and got to my building door before me. He just starts waiting there. I'm like, damn, this guy looks sketchy, I just want to go in. So I'm like, okay, I'll just lap around the fairways one more time and go in after that so I can avoid this guy and wait till he goes away. So I turn around and walk up the driveway again. I start walking on the sidewalk along the road. I look back and notice a car pulled in and picked that guy up. So I'm like, okay, well, I don't mind walking around one more time. I was planning on it anyway, so I keep walking instead of going in. I don't have headphones in because I'm sketched out that car is going to, like, pull up on me and I'm going to get jumped or something lol. The night had me paranoid. So I'm walking down the sidewalk, and I get about 20 feet from my building's driveway before looking back again. I didn't turn around fully, just to my right. I noticed a girl sitting outside her window smoking a cig in another apartment building, no big deal. When I looked back behind me, I was expecting to see just an empty road and sidewalk, but I was startled and got caught off guard. I didn't see him at first, but I saw a man about 10 feet away from me with a big tan coat with a collar, a scarf covering his face, and a hat on, walking slowly in my direction on the sidewalk. Now I just wanted to say that I don't have headphones in, it's quiet, and it's dark. I didn't see anyone behind me before that. I had just checked about a minute before when I crossed the road to get on the sidewalk. And I didn't hear anyone run up or walk behind me at all. I would have noticed. So now I'm like, fuck this. I turn back around and start speed walking to quickly get around the corner that's about 10 more feet away from me so I can turn right onto a street and avoid him walking behind me. I turned the corner and looked back, expecting to see him walking down the road, but nothing. All I saw was the girl sitting on her window smoking to my right. I looked to see if he turned around. Nothing. I checked across the street, and still nothing. He literally vanished. He was nowhere. I didn't hear running or footsteps, I didn't see him anywhere, and there were no cars on the road. He couldn't have gotten picked up. In the less than 30 seconds it took me to turn that corner and look back, the man who was just 10 feet away from me was gone, just nowhere to be found. From where he was standing, I just don't understand where he could have gone without making a sound. There wasn't any possible route that would get him out of sight that easily and quietly. The creepiest part about this is I couldn't see his face at all. And I realized later in the night I saw that guy in the same exact spot that I saw the orb in the sky earlier in the week. The exact same spot. I'm not sure what I saw, can someone help me out? Was it just an apparition or some creepy sneaky guy, and was the orb in the sky just a coincidence? P.S. As I am finishing writing this, I just remembered I had a similar experience a couple months ago while walking around. I saw a little girl just up the road. It confused me. I was wondering who would let their kid out this late. I saw her up until the road curved, and I couldn't see her for a couple seconds. I was not far behind her. As I approached the turn she just made 10 seconds before that, I turn, and she's gone. I didn't see her anywhere. It was weird because there are woods on both sides of the road. It freaked me out definitely, but I figured she must have gone somewhere. After all, she couldn't have just vanished. But after last night, I'm starting to think differently. What could this be? Just ghosts in the area or something else? I've never had an experience like this. Two events that duck with my head to this day. The first incident occurred in my childhood home. Late 1990s. I used to share a room with my parents. My older brother had his room. I always felt uneasy when I had to enter my room alone. Just a weird feeling. One day, in the evening, it was a bit darker, I believe, and I needed something from the room. I turned the light on, but it was dim. I had a terrible feeling immediately. I ran to my side of the room, which was farthest away from the door, and turned around to run back. My parents' bed was against the wall by the door. As I was about to pass their bed to leave, I froze and looked at something moving by their wall, between their bed and against the wall. A figure emerges, climbing the wall with its hands, and quickly turns to look at me, almost twisting its head all the way around. My mom yells for me, and the figure goes back down quickly. When he retreated, he left a red handprint on the wall. That red handprint was there until the day we moved, and I never saw it again. My mom doesn't remember seeing a red handprint. She said there was nothing there when I mentioned it as a child. Nobody else remembers it either. I still don't know who that demon was to this day. I only asked them if they remembered a red handprint on that wall. Didn't tell the whole story. My mom passed in 2022. She still denied seeing a handprint on her deathbed. The second handprint was found in the house I currently reside in. About 5 to 6 years ago. I was sleeping one summer night. I had a square fan sitting on my dresser next to me. It was facing the bed for my husband and me. The dresser is straight across from the door to the room. The door was cracked open for circulation. I woke up. I usually wake up multiple times a night, facing the fan. I looked at it and remember thinking, why is it moving? I looked to the right of the fan and saw a blue figure moving it with just one long, wrinkly finger. I gasped and sit up. At the same time, he seemed to teleport next to the cracked door. I'm sitting up in bed, and he's standing there staring at me. After what felt like forever but was only like 1 or 2 seconds, he said, "Good thing you stopped me," with a grin. I can't forget his voice. It was hoarse but clear. In a panic, I turned to wake my husband, who immediately got up to check the house. Everything was locked, and our 4 dogs were all sleeping around it. We spent a lot of the rest of the night trying to calm me down. I can't forget his face or his voice. With 5 words, he broke me. I've always heard footsteps and shadows, maybe other stuff I blocked out. I've never written these down either. My husband is the only one who knows. I only tell my husband about my experiences. I have a lot of stuff. Lol. But these are the main ones that messed with my head. I've finally found the perfect platform to share one of my most bizarre childhood stories. My family and I were shopping at a local Costco wholesale. Anyway, my family and I sit on the couches and chairs set up for testing furniture. Anyways, after some time, I don't remember exactly how long, this lady walks up behind me without me realizing and startles me by explaining how I was supposed to be excited about meeting her daughter. She was speaking in a high-pitched voice, and although I can't remember word for word what she said, if I were to paraphrase, it would be something like this. "Guess what? You're going to meet my daughter. After all this time living on planet Earth, and now you finally get to meet my daughter, aren't you excited?" Once again, I don't remember exactly what she said, although I do remember her saying something about living on planet Earth, but basically she was buttering me up about meeting her daughter. It was almost as though she expected me to have the same levels of excitement for meeting her daughter as a parent would when finding out that their child just won a competition at school that he trained 4 months for. And keep in mind, this woman is a complete stranger. Anyways, once she's done rambling about meeting her daughter, she ends up introducing her. I see a girl walking down the aisle towards me on all 4s. The reason she was on all 4s was because she had, or was trying to replicate, the exact personality of a puppy. She crawled on all 4s, made arfing noises, panted, and stuck her tongue out, and even went as far as to jump on the chair with me, at which point I told her to leave me alone, and she started whimpering. And then the daughter tried to lick me. She never got the chance to lick me, though, thanks to her mother, the woman trying to hype up meeting the daughter, intervening on my behalf, telling the daughter to get off. I do not recall precisely what my family was doing during that time, but once the daughter began to attempt to lick me, we all departed, likely to avoid these two. That's one of the strangest things from my childhood. I remember some details, such as the incident that still holds the crown for one of the weirdest events in my childhood, but I don't remember others, such as the daughter's name. When the mother introduced the daughter, she shouted its name, but I forget the name, or whether the mother was grabbing my upper arms and shoulders while she was hyping me up. Having served in law enforcement for more than 16 years in Texas, I have witnessed numerous tragic, eerie, and inexplicable incidents during my tenure. From murder scenes to suicides to fatal accidents. Sometimes, a place just feels different. One call I received, a death notification, truly frightened me. I had to contact some family members of the deceased woman who was involved in a fatal car accident a few miles away from her home. When I arrived, I met a woman near the roadway just inside the property gate. She said she heard me coming from miles away. I asked her if she lived at the residence, which she confirmed she did. After asking her to speak with me at the house, she agreed but said she needed the walk, as the house was about 75 yards from the road. After making it to the house, I approached the front door on a small wooden porch and began scanning the driveway for the woman. It was about 1 a.m. and completely dark. While looking for the woman, the front door opened and a younger woman appeared. She was concerned about my presence and asked if everything was okay. I asked if I could speak with her and any other adults inside, and she welcomed me in. I told her I would wait for the woman I met near the gate, and she told me nobody else should be home. I then freaked out and began searching the property. Nothing. After entering the residence, I told her and her husband the news about Susan, who ended up being her mother. She said her mother moved in a few months back after her father had passed and wasn't handling it well. While she and her husband were comforting one another, I began looking at photos on the wall. There was this picture of a middle-aged woman who stuck out to me. She was a younger version of the woman I spoke with near the gate. While looking at the picture, the daughter confirmed that it was her mother, the woman that passed in the wreck. I spoke with the ghost of the individual who died in the crash just before telling her family what happened. I don't believe in anything, strictly speaking. I think nothing is a lot more likely, personally, than most explanations of an afterlife that I've encountered. But distribution of likelihood is a statistical property that people get wrong all the time. We see a 2 in 5 chance and assume it means that a thing will occur 2 out of every 5 times. But in reality, probability resets each time. It's a 40% probability every time, unless the number of conditions changes by removing or adding a possibility. And in that respect, nothing has the same 1 in 1 million probability that any other religious or spiritual belief has. If I can't definitively remove the condition from my probability set, I can't discount it. Then weird shit started happening when I was pregnant. My starting premise was that it was a biological thing. The flood of hormones and the physiological disquiet of morning sickness made it make sense that I might have some dizzy spells or my eyes might play tricks. But I would be lying to say I didn't see or feel something. A reflection moving across a stainless steel fridge like someone walking past despite nobody else being home, sudden cold coming from an interior doorway where chills didn't make sense, and things subtly moving behind me while I worked at my desk. And my male cats very much weren't pregnant, but they saw something too. They would respond to the same shadows or growl down the hallway. My oldest cat lived as my sentry until we moved from that condo later during my pregnancy. But cats are known to have strong reactions when a human they're bonded to is pregnant. They get clingy and defensive without needing any ghosts, just as a matter of course. So nothing stayed in the dataset. We moved into a cute little mid-century in a cute little neighborhood. All seemed well, no more shadows or cold spots, and the baby arrived as expected. When she arrived, sleep became a bit of a sticking point in the house, of course. My husband and I coped by taking shifts where we would watch over our daughter downstairs while the other got some sleep on the main floor. We set up a basement nursery for her, and the parent on shift would usually set up a nest in the basement den. I had to rearrange the furniture shortly into our shift system because I couldn't shake the feeling that something was standing at the base of the stairs and watching me the whole time I was down there. Then there was the sudden dread, the feeling of certainty that the same something had entered the room with my baby, and I needed to go to her. But postpartum is hard, and the hormones are intense, so it still made sense that it could be nothing. Only, our pest control technician, after getting to know him some, admitted to me that he finds something about our basement unsettling, and he tries to get out fast. Our daughter started sleeping better, we ended the shifts, and our lives moved back upstairs. She started to grow and interact with her world, and the staring began. There seemed to be something always just off to the side, in the doorway across the hall, that absolutely captivated her. She grew more and learned to do more things, and the staring became smiling. Then babbling. Then waving. She seemed to be fully interacting with something either behind me or across the hall a lot more often than I cared for after all the above. But babies are going to baby, and I wasn't ready to let go of anything. Then the monitor. I had a hard time with phantom crying when I was trying to fall asleep, thinking I was hearing my daughter just as I drifted off, so we got a very fancy baby monitor to help. It had sound and motion detection and ran on a fully closed system restricted to our Wi-Fi. Only it went off constantly. It was constantly registering motion, sometimes as many as 3 alerts per minute, even when I could see on the screen that my daughter wasn't moving. We changed the sensitivity levels, dropping them so low at one point that the monitor wasn't picking up the actual movement of the actual baby anymore, but still the alerts came. We moved the camera, changed the angle, messed with every setting, and even got a new monitor receiver, assuming ours was defective, but no difference. We eventually just turned off the motion alerts once we got out of the SIDS window. I also learned to turn the monitor off whenever my daughter isn't in her room, because the monitor didn't help the phantom cries either, and I dislike hearing them even louder through the monitor. Today, my daughter still interacts with someone, although perhaps a little less than before, which I am thankful for. Toys still randomly go off in the box sometimes, and a piano mat responds to steps we didn't take, that kind of stuff. I still don't like the basement, but laundry's gotta get done, so I just make it quick. I still don't know what it is, but at least my probability set got a little smaller because it certainly isn't nothing. I'll preface this by saying my great-Grammy was a good old superstitious Irish Nan. She believed in the paranormal and even said that mediums run in our family. She died when I was young enough that I remember going to the funeral and sporadic events, but I can't remember much else, but was apparently very close to me at some point. Most of this was told to me by my mother years later. After we relocated several states away, my mother mentioned that she heard me laughing and talking but did not pay much attention to it. This persisted for several days until my mother concluded that I was merely engaging in loud play with my Barbie dolls. A few months later we returned to the town where my mother grew up to visit. We were at my great-Grammy's house, and I followed her down to the basement. She was trying to find something, and I walked over to a cabinet and opened it, pulling out the thing she was looking for. Apparently my GG thought this was weird but didn't say much about it. It wasn't until she was showing off a photo album that things got weird. She pointed to a picture and laughed, mentioning someone, I don't remember his ties to our family, and how they were so angry over the constant picture taking. Apparently, I then turned to her and said, with as much conviction as a 5-year-old could muster, that's not true. It's because you had the flash on, and he was hungover. The room went quiet while my GG asked how I could have known that. I shrugged and said he told me. She rushed over and showed me the picture, asking if that was the man who told me. I nodded and said he told me lots of stories. She even berated my parents for me knowing the word hungover, but they were adamant that they weren't the ones who told me. When she asked for his name, I pronounced it slightly strangely, but it was close enough to convince my GG that I possessed the family gift. I 100% do not remember anything about this. I don't remember any person, any stories, the name, or even how this man tied into our family. I barely even remember my GG. This all came to light because one day when I was in my late teens, I saw a picture of her sitting in the basement with me, and I mentioned that I remembered that place and how she and my father argued over his soda consumption. I don't really know if I believe in the paranormal, but young me either experienced it or had a vivacious enough imagination to convince those around me that I had. The scariest thing I've experienced was the demon that inhabits my friend's house. Built in the very late 1700s, it was an old farmhouse in southwestern Pennsylvania. The first day I went into the house to help him move a couch in, he asked if I wanted a tour. I agreed. I have had significant paranormal encounters throughout my life, and for the vast majority of them, when something is happening, there's something I call the dread feeling. It feels as if everything becomes still, there's absolutely no sound at all, even that faint ringing in your ears is vacant, and there's an intense desire to flee. As I'm walking farther into the house, I place my right foot on the first stair leading to the next floor. The feeling of dread I encountered at that moment made all others pale in comparison. I've known this guy since I was 9, and he's never believed in the supernatural. However, due to the extreme feeling of dread, I inquired, "Have you had anything weird happen in this house?" To that, his girlfriend, who was accompanying us on the tour, slaps him on the arm and says, "See? He feels it too." At the top of the stairs, there are archways leading to rooms on either end of the hallway. There are no doors attached. There were, however, 2 small archways on either side of the human-sized archways. I may be misremembering if there were 2 small doors on each side of the larger archways or only one. My apologies as I try to recall these experiences in as much detail as possible. I asked him what the small archways were for, since they were only about 2.5 to 3 feet high. He said, "I don't want to talk about those." I laughed and asked again, to which he sternly repeated himself. I had been going through a difficult time and was not in a good place when this discovery began. At my parents' house, where I was residing at the time, I had many paranormal experiences and had gotten to a point where I no longer felt like being afraid of whatever entity was in my parents' house. I grew up thinking my parents' house was haunted but have since changed my opinion. The one closet in the attic was slowly creaking open, and I shouted at it, "If you're going to attack me, then do it. I'm sick of being afraid of whatever you are." Back at my friend's house some nights later, there was a banging with 3 loud thuds. My friend looked at his girlfriend and said, "That hasn't happened in a while." I, having recently confronted the entity at my parents', which seemed to calm the action down at my parents' considerably, foolishly began to do the same to this entity, not realizing what it was. While nothing happened that night other than some more thuds, later nights would not have such results. The scariest incidents occurred when the thuds returned, sometimes so loud that they shook the house. I was sitting on the couch with my chihuahua, who started making this guttural growl at the door that led to the original part of the house. We usually hung out in an addition he built onto the original house. The back of the couch faced the archway that led into the dark, original part of the house. My dog was about 2 feet away from me, and he began to play peekaboo while growling a strange sound that I have never heard him make before or since. His fur is standing up, and he just keeps popping up and down, growling at that archway. While this is happening, I am clearly watching him, and between us, an extremely dark ball that resembles a velvet rope begins to form, swirling and swelling larger and larger. I was in a state of shock. However, I have always been told not to show fear to a demon. I still do not know what came over me, but I was worried it was going to hurt my dog, and so I shoved my hand into the ball. It was freezing cold, but then it just dissipated into the air. It did many other things on other nights, including booming thuds, always in threes, in varying degrees of amplitude and volume. Sometimes you could barely hear it, other times it would shake the house to the degree it sounded like someone had wrecked a truck into the front door. Once it was so violent it knocked an air mattress that was leaning up against the wall across the hall, poured gallons of water out of the ceiling fan/light, swarmed carrion beetles out of the same ceiling fan, slammed window blinds, turned the TV on and off over and over, threw a bottle of Mountain Dew at my head, and once showed itself in its entirety to another friend of my friend's who was so terrified he refused to even drive on the same street as the house. This thing is not shy. That's the scariest one. I have plenty more though. There's something very weird about the town I grew up in and the surrounding area. Quite a few years back I was visiting my mom in my hometown. One night I decided to take my dog for a walk to visit an old friend. I got ready, put my dog's harness and leash on, gave my mom a kiss, and said I'd be home later. About a block or 2 into the walk, my dog kept looking behind us and started a slight growl at one point. I stopped and looked back but didn't see anything, so we continued on. But he insisted on holding back and growling, so I stopped again and looked back again, and I noticed a light in the middle of the street, like someone was above holding a flashlight down on the street. We slowly walked towards the light, and the closer we got, Benji, that's my dog's name, was more and more resistant. I noticed the light was shining on the ground, but it didn't seem to affect or light up anything around it. I got closer and looked up but couldn't make out a source. I moved closer to it and reached out my hand to see if it would illuminate as I got nearer, but nothing happened. I extended my hand a bit more to touch it, and suddenly, I shook and looked up to find myself back in my room, sitting on the edge of my bed with the leash in hand, still tied to Benji. I decided I had dozed off and dreamt the whole thing, so I got up and said, "Well, let's get going to Benji." As we proceed to leave, we walk into the living room to say bye to Mom, but as soon as she saw me, she screamed and got mad at me for scaring her. Then she said, "How the hell did you get back in the house without me seeing you?" "I've been here the whole time," she said. I had no clue how to answer this, so I just said, "Why did you think I had already left?" She said, "No, I don't think you already left. I know you did, I saw you and said bye." "What the hell are you up to?" She said. "Nothing." I said I think I may have blacked out for a minute. She said, "Either way, how did you get back in the house without me seeing you? You better not be climbing through windows." So the following morning I woke up with a strange itch right in the middle of my back. It itched but was also numb around it, yet it hurt. A day or 2 later I'm walking past my mom's room and see her up against the wall like a bear scratching his back. I smiled and said, "Back itching a little?" She looked at me and said it was strange because she had woken up a few days earlier with an itch in the center of her back. Although it hurt to scratch, it also felt numb. My face went pale, and I sat down with her to explain all that took place. From that point on, she was always saying she felt like someone might have stuck something in our backs for some reason. We never said anything, and periodically when one of us started to experience pain, we'd call the other, and I'll be damned if the pains didn't coincide with each other. When she felt the pain, I did as well, and vice versa. To this day I have no clue what happened that night, but it wasn't any kind of normal event. And to this day I still have that same pain in my back. I have no clue what happened, and I most likely never will. It's just an unexplainable experience, I guess. I don't know if this was divine intervention or something very dark. This is my true, personal story, and I have only told a few people because most do not believe me. This has been weighing on me for over a decade, and I need your guys' thoughts. I, 23 female, was about 8 or 9 years old when this happened. My mom and I lived in a third-floor apartment while she was in nursing school. One of her friends from school, whom I'll call Mary, had a daughter around my age, maybe a year or two older. I'll call her Betsy. One night, my mom and Mary were studying and hanging out in our apartment while Betsy and I tried to find a movie to watch since we had exhausted all our toys. It was around 9 p.m., and I didn't have anything at home that we wanted to watch. Mary, however, had a box of DVDs in her car's trunk. Betsy and I asked if we could go down to the parking lot to look for Despicable Me. Since our apartment balcony faced the parking lot, our mom said yes, reminding us that they'd keep the balcony door open and check on us while we were outside. For context, this is important, our apartment complex had 10 or more buildings, and we were in one of the buildings at the very back of the complex. The street our building was on had 2 lanes on either side of a long, narrow median that stretched the whole street. This median was large enough to hold storage units, small garage-like structures that residents could rent. On one side of the median, closer to our apartment building, there was a single-lane street for driving. On the other side, there was another driving lane, plus a row of parking spaces lining the street. If you followed the street in one direction, it would take you past the storage units and eventually curve toward the dumpsters. From there, the road would continue toward the front of the complex. But if you went the other way, it led to another building in the complex and a much larger parking lot, which also had a road leading into the rest of the complex and the entrance. That night, there were about 40 cars scattered throughout this area, some in the designated parking spaces and some along the street. Betsy and I made our way to Mary's car, parked not across the median but directly in front of our apartment/balcony. Her trunk was packed with clothes, boxes, and other random items, so we had to take a lot of stuff out to find the DVDs. As we were searching, we noticed an old, powder blue pickup truck driving toward us from the direction of the dumpsters. It stopped about 100 feet away, turned on its brights, and just sat there. I've always been an anxious person since my mom had drilled stranger danger into my head from a young age. I told Betsy that we should leave, but she brushed it off, saying the driver was probably just being careful not to hit us since it was dark out. The truck flashed its brights once or twice before finally driving past us, but instead of continuing down the street or leaving the complex, it made a U-turn around the median and went back the way it came. That felt weird, but we were too focused on finding our DVD to think much of it. A few minutes later, we were still looking for the movie. We had resorted to taking everything out of the trunk and putting it on the ground so we could see inside more clearly. Then, the truck came back. This time, it stopped closer, flashed its brights again, and just sat there. A horrible sinking feeling settled in my stomach. The truck flashed its brights and did another U-turn after it slowly drove by us. Again, Betsy insisted it was nothing, but I told her that if the truck came back once more, I was going upstairs, DVD or not. She laughed at me but agreed. We kept looking, and sure enough, the truck returned and parked even closer. The driver revved the engine multiple times, then inched toward us, flashing the lights repeatedly. Pure terror shot through me, and Betsy finally realized something was very wrong. We started shoving everything back into the trunk as fast as we could. The truck kept creeping closer, stopping, revving, and flashing its lights, over and over. We were in tears, terrified. Then, every single car in the parking lot, at least 40 of them, turned on their hazard lights, and their alarms started blaring. The entire parking lot lit up with flashing lights. The noise was deafening. I have never heard anything that loud in my life. The moment we realized what was happening, Betsy and I ran. We didn't care about the mess anymore, we just sprinted back to the apartment, screaming. The truck sped off, leaving the complex without going back in the direction it had come from. As we ran up the 3 flights of stairs, I could still hear the alarms. We were crying, panicked, and pounding on the apartment door the second we got there. When my mom opened it, she and Mary looked completely confused. I turned toward the balcony, the door was still open. They should have seen and heard everything. But when we ran inside and tried to show them, the parking lot was silent. No alarms. No hazards were flashing. Just the mess we'd left behind. Our moms asked why we had left everything on the ground and told us we had to go pick it up. When we tried to explain what had happened, they didn't believe us. They laughed it off and told us to calm down before going back downstairs. I'm 23 now, and I think about that night all the time. I still have nightmares about that truck at least once a month. Betsy and I lost touch after my mom finished school, but every once in a while, I text her to ask if she remembers, to reassure myself that I didn't make it up in my head. She always remembers, and she has dreams too. The only person who ever truly believed me, apart from Betsy, was my dad. When I told him the story a few days later, he said I looked more terrified than he'd ever seen me. He thinks it could have been a power surge but didn't know for sure because it was all so bizarre. I have no idea what happened that night. I don't know if it was divine intervention, something supernatural, or just an incredibly close call with a dangerous person. But I think about it every single day.